Hello guys, welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash tamed his psychic powers and decided to get married with Sabrina. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Unseen Current. The roar of the crowd was a physical thing, a wave of sound that beat against the sides of the Indigo Plateau Stadium and crashed over the battlefield. It was a familiar pressure, one that Ash Ketchum had learned to breathe in like air. 20 years old now, he stood on the champion's dais, the frantic energy of tens of thousands of people a distant hum behind the focused silence in his own mind. His posture was relaxed, hands resting lightly on his hips, but his eyes were sharp, tracking every twitch and shudder of the behemoth on the other side of the field. Richie's Tyranitar was a monster of stone and fury, a living mountain that had torn through half of Ash's team. Its roar had shattered defensive barriers and its stone edge had carved craters into the reinforced field. But it was tiring. Ash could feel it. Not just by the slight sag in its shoulders or the heaving of its chest, but in the frantic, ragged edge of its fighting spirit, a current of energy he could perceive as clearly as the wind on his face. Across from him, Richie, his old rival from the Indigo League, was a knot of tense energy. "You've gotten stronger, Ash. But Sparky and I aren't done yet. Tyranitar, use Hyper Beam." Ash didn't flinch. He didn't need to shout a command. A flicker of intent, a shared thought honed over a decade of battle and brotherhood, was all it took. Pikachu. The small yellow Pokémon on the field before him was a stark contrast to the towering Tyranitar. But where the rock type was brute force, Pikachu was a scalpel. He moved with a liquid grace, a blur of motion that seemed to leave yellow after images in his wake. As Tyranitar's maw began to glow with terrifying, condensed power, Pikachu was already moving, his feet barely seeming to touch the ground. The world seemed to slow. Ash felt the air itself grow taut, stretched thin by the building energy. He saw the beam coalesce, a torrent of pure destructive force. Richie's strategy was simple, overwhelming power. Obliteration. A fine strategy, if your opponent couldn't think faster than light. A subtle shift in Ash's focus, a bare twitch of his fingers, and the air in front of Pikachu shimmered for an instant, like heat haze off summer asphalt. It was an invisible wall, a kinetic shield woven from his own latent energy, a trick he'd spent years mastering in the quiet solitude of Mount Silver. Not a barrier to stop the blast, but one to gently, almost imperceptibly, redirect it. The hyper beam erupted, a blinding column of pink and white energy that tore across the field. The crowd gasped. The beam screamed past Pikachu's shoulder by a hair's breadth, missing him by a margin that looked like pure, impossible luck. It slammed into the stadium wall far behind Ash, the explosion deafening, the shockwave washing over him. Richie's eyes were wide with disbelief. How did it? He didn't get to finish. The hyper beam left Tyranitar completely immobilized, smoke wisping from its jaws as it struggled to recharge. That was the opening. "Now," Ash said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the ringing in his ears. Pikachu's body arched, his red cheeks sparking not with aggression, but with a deep, humming power. He became a conduit. A river of gold, a focused, controlled torrent of electricity, poured from him, not in a wild bolt, but in a precise, inescapable spear of lightning. Volt tackle, but refined, perfected. It struck the exhausted Tyranitar dead center. The massive creature shuddered, its eyes rolling back, before it crashed to the ground with a stadium-shaking thud. The silence that followed was more profound than the noise that came before it. Then, the referee's flag shot up. Tyranitar is unable to battle. The victory goes to Ash Ketchum. The stadium exploded. The sound was a tidal wave this time, washing away the silence in his mind. Ash allowed a small, genuine smile to touch his lips as he walked forward, Pikachu leaping onto his shoulder and nuzzling his cheek. He waved to the crowd, a gesture of thanks, but his mind was already moving on. It was a good fight, a good win in the Champions League exhibition circuit, but it was just another step. He met Richie at the center of the field, shaking his hand firmly. "That was a close one, Richie. Your Tyranitar is incredible." Richie shook his head, a look of dazed respect on his face. "Close. Ash, that hyper beam. It was like it bent. I've never seen anything like it. And Pikachu, he's not just strong, he's different." Ash just smiled. "We've been training." As they parted ways and the ceremony of the win began to unfold, Ash felt a strange dissonance. The adoration of the crowd, the flashing lights, the praise from the commentators, it all felt distant, muffled. He was grateful, but he no longer craved it. The real victory was in the silent communication with Pikachu, the perfect execution of a plan that existed only in their shared thoughts. That was the connection that mattered. He was about to head back to the locker room, to meet up with Misty and Brock who were waiting for him, when he felt it. It wasn't a sound. It was a needle. A thin, sharp, piercing needle of pure panic, jabbing into the back of his consciousness. It was faint, almost lost in the psychic residue of the crowd's excitement, but it was unmistakably there. It was human, and it was terrified. He'd learned to recognize the texture of different emotions, the unique frequency of a soul in distress. This was the raw, primal fear of a cornered animal. He stopped, his hand on the tunnel entrance. Pikachu tilted his head, chattering a questioning sound. Ash gently scratched behind his ears. "I know, buddy. I feel it too." Misty and Brock were approaching, broad smiles on their faces. "That was amazing, Ash," Misty said, her voice full of genuine pride. "The way you had Pikachu dodge that hyper beam, I thought you were a goner." Brock nodded, his expression more analytical. "Your synergy is reaching a new level. It's almost precognitive." "Almost." Ash gave them a grateful but distracted look. "Thanks, guys. Hey, listen, I have to go check on something. I'll meet you back at the Pokemon Center, okay?" Before they could ask, he turned and broke into a jog, not towards the locker room, but towards a public exit on the far side of the stadium. The needle of fear was his compass, pulling him through the throng of departing fans. People called his name, reached out for autographs, but he moved through them with a polite but unbreakable focus, his senses zeroed in on the psychic cry. It was getting stronger, more desperate. It led him away from the main thoroughfares of Viridian City, into the labyrinth of back alleys that crisscrossed the city's underbelly. The scent of stale water and overflowing dumpsters replaced the smell of popcorn and ozone. The concrete walls were a canvas of graffiti, the evening light casting long, distorted shadows. He rounded a corner and the scene unfolded before him, stark and ugly. A boy, no older than 12, was pressed against a graffiti-scarred brick wall. He was small and shaking, clutching a trembling Kadabra in his arms like a shield. 3 older, bulkier teenagers were closing in on him, their postures predatory. "Look at the little freak," the leader sneered, a lanky youth with a cruel twist to his lips. "Think your weirdo pet can save you? What's it gonna do, read our minds?" "Leave us alone," the boy whispered, his voice cracking with fear. His Kadabra's eyes were glowing faintly, a spoon held in its hand vibrating with nervous energy. "Or what?" another of the thugs laughed, cracking his knuckles. "We just want the weird spoon, kid. And maybe your wallet. Hand it over, and we'll only rough you up a little." Ash didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. He simply stepped out from the mouth of the alley, and his presence changed the very air around them. The shadows seemed to deepen. The casual menace of the thugs faltered as they felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. It was the feeling of a predator entering its territory, a pressure that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with intent. The leader turned, his sneer wavering. "Who the hell are you? Get lost. This is private." Ash's gaze was flat, his expression unreadable. He looked past the leader, his eyes resting on the terrified boy. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice quiet, yet it carried an authority that made the alley feel small. I think so," the boy stammered. The leader, emboldened by Ash's lack of overt aggression, took a step forward. "Didn't you hear me? I said get lost." He threw a clumsy, telegraphed punch aimed at Ash's face. Ash didn't move. He didn't flinch, didn't raise a hand to block. The fist flew through the air and stopped. It just stopped. A mere inch from his nose, held fast as if it had struck an invisible wall of solid glass. The thug's eyes went wide with confusion and a dawning fear. He tried to pull his hand back, but it was stuck, held in a grip he couldn't see or understand. "Let him go," Ash said again, his voice dropping an octave. It was no longer a question. It was a command. The thug's friends were frozen, their bravado evaporating into the grimy air. The leader, his face pale, finally managed a choked sound. "What are you?" "The guy who's telling you to walk away," Ash replied, his eyes finally shifting to meet the leader's. The unseen pressure increased, and the thug felt a distinct, terrifying sensation, as if his own body was about to be crushed by the weight of the air itself. With a flick of Ash's wrist, the invisible force released him, sending him stumbling back into his friends. "Get him," the leader shrieked, his fear turning to rage. "Mac Hoke, go. You too, Houndoom." Two pokeballs burst open. A muscular Mac Hoke flexed, its 4 arms ready for a fight. A sleek Houndoom bared its fangs, a low growl rumbling in its chest. Ash sighed, a sound of weary disappointment. Pikachu, still on his shoulder, tensed, his cheeks sparking. "It's okay, buddy," Ash murmured, his hand resting on Pikachu's head. "I've got this." The Houndoom lunged forward, its jaw opening to unleash a torrent of fire. Ash raised a hand, palm open. The flamethrower erupted, a jet of searing orange that suddenly bent in mid-air, curving back on itself as if striking a concave mirror. It splashed harmlessly against the brick wall a few feet from the Houndoom, who yelped and jumped back in shock. At the same time, the Mac Hoke charged, its 4 fists a blur of motion. Ash didn't even look at it. He kept his eyes on the thugs. With a casual gesture, he clenched his free hand into a fist. The charging Mac Hoke was lifted from its feet, its limbs flailing as it was hoisted 5 feet into the air by an unseen power, held in a telekinetic grip as easily as a child holding a doll. It struggled, its powerful muscles useless against the force that bound it. The 3 teenagers stared, their mouths agape. This wasn't a Pokemon battle. This was something else. Something unnatural. "Recall your Pokemon," Ash said, his voice now cold as iron. "And get out of my sight. If I ever see you bothering anyone in this city again, you won't get a warning." The terror was absolute now. Scrambling for their Pokeballs, they recalled their confused and frightened Pokemon. The Mac Hoke dropped to the ground with a soft thud. Without another word, they turned and fled, their footsteps echoing down the alley until they were gone. The oppressive weight in the air vanished. Ash took a breath and the calm, focused energy receded, replaced by his natural warmth. He turned to the young boy, who was staring at him with wide, awestruck eyes. "Are you hurt?" Ash asked, his voice gentle. The boy shook his head, still trembling. "No. Thank you." What was that?" "Just a little something I picked up," Ash said with a wry smile, walking over and kneeling down to the boy's level. "What's your name?" "Leo," the boy whispered. He looked down at his Kadabra, who was now calmly polishing its spoon. "We were just trying to get to Saffron City." "Saffron? That's a long way from here." "What's in Saffron?" Leo looked up, his eyes shining with a mixture of fear and hope. "The gym leader. Sabrina. They say she helps people like me. People who are different." He gestured vaguely, his hand fluttering. People who can feel things. Hear thoughts. My parents got scared. They said I needed to be somewhere safe. Ash's expression softened with a deep, resonant empathy. He knew that feeling. For years, his strange intuitions, his uncanny connection with his Pokémon, the odd surges of power he couldn't explain, they had made him feel isolated, an oddity. It had taken a journey to the Tree of Beginning and an encounter with Sir Aaron's Lucario to understand that what he had was aura, a latent psychic potential that was part of his very being. Taming it had been a harder journey than winning any league. I know the feeling, Ash said quietly. He stood up, offering a hand to Leo. Come on. Saffron City is on my way. I'll make sure you get there safely. Leo's face lit up. Really? You do that? Of course, Ash said, his smile easy and reassuring. No one should have to make that kind of journey alone. The bullet train to Saffron was a streak of silver, blurring the landscape into a wash of green and brown. Leo sat beside Ash, his initial fear replaced by a bubbling, childlike curiosity. He'd peppered Ash with questions for the first hour, his psychic senses buzzing with excitement. Ash answered patiently, deflecting the more pointed questions about his abilities with practiced ease. He didn't want to frighten the boy, nor did he want to advertise his power. It was a tool, a part of him, not a spectacle. Does it ever feel loud? Leo asked, his voice small as he stared out the window. Inside your head? Ash glanced at him. The question was more perceptive than he'd expected. Sometimes, he admitted. When I was younger, it was just noise. Like 100 radio stations all playing at once. You learn to find your own station. To tune the rest out, and to listen to the ones that matter. He thought of Pikachu, of Charizard, of the silent, perfect understanding they shared. That was his station. That was his anchor. When they finally arrived in Saffron City, the difference was palpable. The city had shed its old, cold reputation. The monolithic, imposing architecture that Ash remembered was softened by rooftop gardens and wide, clean avenues. There was a vibrancy here that had been absent before. Their destination was unmistakable. The Saffron Gym was no longer the dark, foreboding fortress he had challenged as a 10-year-old. It had been completely redesigned. The building was a marvel of modern architecture, all sweeping curves of white metal and vast panes of shimmering glass. A beautiful, meticulously kept garden surrounded it, filled with psychic-type Pokémon like Ralts and Elgium playing peacefully among the flowers. It looked less like a gym and more like a university or an art museum. A sanctuary. Ash pushed open the heavy glass doors, a soft chime announcing their arrival. The interior was even more impressive. A grand, open atrium lobby soared 3 stories high, sunlight pouring in from a crystal-domed ceiling. A gentle waterfall cascaded down a polished stone wall into a serene pond where Slowpoke drifted lazily. Young trainers and their Pokémon were scattered throughout, some meditating on cushions, others practicing simple telekinetic exercises, lifting blocks into neat stacks under the watchful eye of instructors. And there, in the center of it all, she stood. She was not the cold, emotionless dull child he remembered. The Sabrina who stood before him was a woman grown, exuding an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. She was dressed in elegant, form-fitting black robes that seemed to drink the light, a stark contrast to the bright, airy space around her. Her hair was still a cascade of dark silk, but her eyes were what held him. They were the same deep, piercing violet he recalled, but the unnerving emptiness was gone. Now, they held an ancient, knowing depth, the wisdom of someone who saw more than just the physical world. She was speaking softly to a young girl who had managed to levitate a small pebble, offering a word of encouragement. Then, she looked up, her gaze sweeping past Leo and landing directly on Ash. The world tilted on its axis. It wasn't a sound or a sight. It was a feeling, a sudden and profound resonance that vibrated at the very core of his being. It was as if a dormant part of his mind had been struck like a tuning fork. A pure, Clear cord of immense psychic power washed over him, not invasive or aggressive, but inquisitive, assessing. It was her, reaching out, her consciousness brushing against his. He instinctively met it with his own, not with a shield, but with an open hand. He let her feel the shape of his aura, its raw, kinetic, and empathic nature. He felt the structure of her own power in return, vast, precise, intricate as a spider's web, a universe of controlled thought and telepathic might. For a breathtaking second, their minds touched, and in that contact, there was a startling, impossible sense of recognition. A harmony. It felt like coming home. Sabrina's eyes widened, just a fraction, the only outward sign of her surprise. The faintest hint of color touched her pale cheeks. She had expected a powerful trainer, a hero of the league. She had not expected this. An equal. A counterpart. A different kind of power that sang in the same key as her own. She gracefully concluded her conversation with the student and glided towards them, her movements fluid and silent. "Leo," she said, her voice a low, melodic contralto that held the same power as her psychic presence. She knelt and smiled warmly at the boy. "We've been expecting you. Welcome to the Institute. You are safe here." Leo, overwhelmed, simply nodded and allowed one of the instructors to gently lead him away. Sabrina rose and turned her full attention back to Ash. The psychic hum between them remained, a low, thrumming current in the air. "Ash Ketchum," she said. "It wasn't a question. You have grown since your last visit to my gym." "So have you, Sabrina," he replied, a genuine smile on his face. He felt strangely at ease, the connection between them a source of calm rather than intimidation. "This place, it's incredible. It's not what I remember. I decided it was time to build something, rather than just hide. To create a sanctuary, not a fortress," she explained, her gaze never leaving his. "Thank you for bringing him here. The world is not always kind to those who are different." "I know," he said, and the simple words carried a universe of shared understanding. They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, the unspoken conversation between their minds far more verbose than any words they could exchange. He felt her curiosity, her surprise, the way she was mapping the unique signature of his aura. He felt her power, not as a threat, but as a vast, calm ocean. He was about to say something more, to ask about the changes, about her, when it happened. It started as a wave of vertigo, a sudden, sickening lurch in his equilibrium. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing in on him. A low, subsonic hum vibrated through the glass and steel of the building, a frequency that wasn't sound but pure, malevolent energy. A silent scream echoed in the psychic plane, a wave of raw, unfiltered dread. Around them, the young psychics in the lobby cried out, clutching their heads. The ralts in the garden collapsed, whimpering. The water in the pond rippled violently, though nothing had touched it. The glass dome overhead began to shudder, not from a physical tremor, but from the sheer psychic pressure. Sabrina stiffened, her face paling, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. Her eyes were unfocused, staring into a distance only she could see. Ash felt the wave of panic from the children, the confusion and fear from the instructors. He instinctively acted, pushing his own aura outwards, not as a weapon, but as a blanket, a projection of calm and safety to shield those nearest to him. He felt Sabrina do the same, her own power rising to form a massive, invisible dome over the entire building, a telekinetic barrier that fought against the crushing external pressure. For a moment, their powers worked in unconscious tandem, his empathic calm soothing the panic within while her kinetic shield defended from without. Then, as quickly as it began, it was over. The pressure vanished. The silent scream faded. The building fell still, the only sound the soft crying of the frightened children. Ash took a ragged breath, the sudden release of pressure leaving him lightheaded. He looked at Sabrina. She was breathing heavily, a fine sheen of sweat on her brow. The mask of poised control had been shattered, revealing the strain of the effort. Her violet eyes, wide and filled with a terrifying new understanding, met his. The intrigue was gone. The curiosity was gone. In its place was a shared, chilling certainty. The air between them crackled with the unspoken truth. This was not a natural event. This was not an accident. This was a warning. Chapter 2, Echoes in the static. The psychic shockwave receded as quickly as it had come, leaving a vacuum in its wake. The oppressive pressure vanished, but the silence that replaced it was heavy, suffocating, filled with the ghosts of whimpers from the children huddled in the grand lobby. The beautiful sanctuary, a moment ago a place of serene learning, now felt like a battlefield after the shelling has stopped. Ash's ears rang with the phantom echo of that silent, psychic scream. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his protective aura of calm slowly retracting as the immediate danger passed. His gaze snapped to Sabrina. She stood rigid, her face ashen, the usual regal composure shattered by a raw, visceral shock. A fine tremor ran through her hand where it was clenched at her side. Her eyes, wide and dark, were locked with his, and in their violet depths, he saw not the coolly distant gym leader, but a fellow soldier who had just survived the same inexplicable blast. "Everyone, status report." Her voice cut through the stunned silence, regaining a fraction of its command. It was strained, but it was a rallying point. Instructors, shaking off their own disorientation, rushed to the aid of their young students, their voices a low murmur of comfort and reassurance. Ash moved without thinking, his instincts taking over. He knelt beside a small girl with bright pink hair who was curled into a ball, her auber trembling in her lap. He didn't say anything. He just rested a hand gently on her shoulder, letting a current of simple, unwavering warmth flow from him. It wasn't a psychic command to be calm, it was an empathic promise. "You are safe. The danger has passed. I am here." The girl's ragged sobs slowly subsided, her breathing evening out. She looked up at him, her tear-filled eyes wide with a fragile trust. He felt a presence beside him and looked up to see Sabrina. She had composed herself, a mask of control settling back over her features, but he could see the effort it took. He could feel it in the tight web of her psychic presence. "The perimeter is secure," she said, her voice low and tense. "No physical damage to the building, but the younger students are shaken. A few of the more sensitive Pokémon have fainted. It was a purely psychic event." "I felt it," Ash replied, standing up to face her. It wasn't just pressure. It was hateful. Old. Her eyes narrowed, acknowledging his perception. Yes. It felt like a stone being turned over, something that has slept for a very long time being disturbed. She surveyed her gym, her students, her life's work. A flicker of cold fury passed through her mind, a wave of protective anger so potent that Ash felt it as a spike of heat. Whatever it was, it targeted us. It targeted this place. Ash thought of the Indigo Plateau, the roar of the crowd, the simple joy of victory. It felt a lifetime away. His plans to meet Misty and Brock, to celebrate, had evaporated. The needle of fear that had led him to Leo had been a prelude, a single note before this horrifying symphony. He couldn't walk away from this. His own nature, the part of him that always ran toward the fire, wouldn't let him. And more than that, the resonance he'd felt with Sabrina, that startling, undeniable connection, now felt less like a curiosity and more like a responsibility. They had felt the threat in the same way. Perhaps they were meant to face it in the same way. "I'm staying," he said. It wasn't an offer. It was a statement of fact. Sabrina's gaze lingered on him. For a moment, he thought she would refuse, that her pride and self-reliance would demand she handle this alone. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the weighing of variables. But then, she gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I would be a fool to refuse your help. Your power, it is unlike anything I have ever encountered." It acted as an anchor while mine was a shield. Before they could plan their next move, Ash's pokegear buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to see Brock's face on the small screen. Ash. Are you okay? Brock's voice was laced with concern. We felt a tremor all the way at the Pokemon Center, but the news isn't reporting any earthquake. Then we heard. I don't know. A high-frequency noise that gave everyone a headache. What's going on over there? Ash glanced at Sabrina, who gave him a subtle nod of permission. He wasn't going to explain the full, psychic nature of the event over an open channel, but his friends deserved to know he was safe. We're all right, Brock. It was some kind of energy surge. The gym systems handled it, he lied smoothly. Listen, things are a little chaotic here. I'm going to stay and help Sabrina make sure everything is secure. I don't know how long it will take. Are you sure? Misty's voice chimed in from beside Brock. We can come over there. My Starmie, no, Ash said, perhaps a little too firmly. He softened his tone. I appreciate it, Mist, really. But this isn't a Pokemon battle. It's a delicate situation. I'll be fine. I'll call you when I know more. He could see the reluctance on their faces, but also the trust. They had been through enough with him to know when to push and when to let him handle things. All right, Ash, Brock said finally. Be careful. That didn't feel like any normal energy surge. I will, Ash promised, ending the call. He pocketed the device and turned back to Sabrina. The world outside the gym's glass walls continued on, oblivious. Inside, a silent war had just been declared. My office, Sabrina said, her voice all business. We need to determine the origin of the attack. She led him away from the main lobby, through a corridor where the air still felt thin and sharp. Her office was on the top floor, a spacious, minimalist room with one wall made entirely of glass, offering a panoramic view of Saffron City. A large, dark wood desk stood at the center, impeccably clean save for a single, framed photograph. The rest of the room was lined with bookshelves, but they weren't filled with paper books. Instead, they held rows of glimmering, faintly glowing crystals of all shapes and sizes. A library of thoughts, Sabrina explained, noticing his gaze. Memories, theories, psychic treatises. More efficient than paper. Ash walked over to her desk, his eyes drawn to the photograph. It was of a much younger Sabrina, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with the same dark hair and intense eyes. In the picture, she was smiling a small, genuine smile, holding up a crudely made doll. It was a startling glimpse of the child before she had encased herself in ice. Sabrina's psychic presence tightened for a fraction of a second as she saw him looking at it, a reflexive flicker of defensiveness, of protecting a cherished vulnerability. Then, it relaxed. A gift. From my father, she said, her voice neutral. A reminder of a time before the noise became too loud. Ash understood completely. Before you learn to find your own station, he murmured, echoing the words he'd spoken to Leo. Her head snapped up, her violet eyes locking on him. The air between them hummed with that now familiar resonance. You felt it too, she stated, not a question. The cacophony. The thoughts of others bleeding into your own. Not thoughts, not for me, he clarified. Feelings. Emotions. It used to be overwhelming. A crowd this big, he gestured vaguely toward the city outside, it was like drowning in fear, and anger, and 1,000 other things. My Pokemon, they help me focus. Their feelings are clearer. Purer. They became my anchor. A new level of understanding passed between them. They were two sides of the same coin, she, the telepath who had been overwhelmed by thoughts, he, the empath who had been overwhelmed by emotions. Both had found a way to master the chaos, to build a fortress of control around a core of immense power. The wave we just felt, Sabrina said, pulling them back to the crisis at hand, it had an epicenter. I was able to get a partial trace before I had to reinforce the shields. It was like a psychic seismograph. The source is somewhere to the west. On the outskirts of Celadon City. Her eyes unfocused for a moment as she accessed her mental map of the Kanto region. There's a lingering, static. An echo. It's faint, but it's wrong. It feels like the psychic equivalent of nails on a chalkboard. Celadon City. Ash frowned. What's out there? Mostly forest. A few old industrial sites. And one decommissioned power plant, she said, her focus returning. It was shut down over a decade ago after a geological survey found the area to be unstable. A power plant feels like a good place to start, Ash said, his tone decisive. Pikachu, who had been perched on the back of a chair, hopped onto Ash's shoulder, his tail twitching with agitation. He could feel the residual static too, a wrongness that set his fur on edge. Sabrina studied him for a long moment, a new thought dawning. If we are to face this, I need to understand the full nature of your ability. Vague feelings and kinetic redirections in a stadium are one thing. An unknown, hostile psychic entity is another. And you need to understand what I am capable of. We cannot function as a team if we are a mystery to one another. What do you have in mind? Ash asked. A rare, dangerous smile touched her lips. A sparring session. The training hall was deep in the sublevels of the gym, a vast, cavernous chamber with reinforced walls and a high ceiling. It was designed for psychics to unleash their power in a controlled environment. The air was cool and still. Ash stood on one side of the room, Pikachu at his feet, alert and ready. Sabrina stood opposite him, her black robes a stark contrast to the pale gray of the walls. No Pokemon, she said, her voice echoing slightly in the large space. Just us. The goal is not to harm, but to test. To understand. Show me what you are. Ash rolled his shoulders, feeling the familiar thrum of energy begin to build in his chest. All right. You first. Sabrina didn't move. She simply raised a hand, and the world dissolved. One moment, Ash was in the training hall. The next, he was back at the Indigo Plateau, the roar of the crowd deafening. A massive Tyranitar thundered towards him, its jaws open, a hyper beam charging. The illusion was perfect. He could feel the heat, smell the ozone, feel the ground shake. His battle instincts screamed at him to dodge, to counter. But he stood his ground. He closed his eyes, shutting out the sensory assault, and focused inward. He reached for the feeling, the spirit of the attack. It was hollow. There was no rage, no intent to win, no bond between trainer and Pokemon. It was a puppet, a flawless creation of light and sound with no soul. He opened his eyes and pushed his hand forward. Not a shield, but a pulse. A wave of pure, unstructured kinetic force erupted from him. The illusion shattered like glass, the image of the Tyranitar dissolving into 1,000 glittering shards of light that faded into nothing. He was back in the training hall. Sabrina's expression was unreadable, but he could feel a flicker of surprise in her psychic presence. Impressive, she conceded. You don't see through the illusion. You feel through it. A brute force emotional counter. Now, my turn. This time, she didn't create an illusion. She reached for his mind. He felt it as a cold, precise pressure at the edges of his consciousness, a surgical probe seeking entry. It was not violent, but it was relentless. It sought to peel back the layers of his thoughts, to read his memories, to map the pathways of his mind. Ash gritted his teeth. He couldn't build a mental wall like she probably could. His mind wasn't a fortress, it was a wilderness. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He opened the floodgates. He didn't try to block her. He met her probe with a tidal wave of pure, unfiltered empathic data. He hit her with the roaring joy of winning his first gym badge, the gut-wrenching sorrow of leaving his butter free, the searing loyalty he felt for Pikachu, the volcanic rage of seeing a Pokemon abused, the Bone-deep weariness of 1,000 miles on the road, the blazing hope of a new dawn. He gave her everything, a chaotic, 20-year storm of pure feeling. Sabrina staggered back a step, her hand flying to her temple. The probe retracted instantly. It was like trying to analyze a hurricane by sticking a thermometer in it. Her precise, telepathic mind was built for order and clarity, his empathic core was a tempest of raw, untamed emotion. By the stars, she whispered, her eyes wide. It's not a mind. It's a force of nature. Now you know, Ash said, breathing a little heavily. The effort had cost him. My turn. He didn't attack her mind. That wasn't his way. His power was kinetic, empathic. It was tied to the physical world. He focused on the dozen training dummies that lined the walls, each one a life-sized mannequin of solid plasteel. With a grunt of effort, he clenched his fists, and all 12 of them lifted from the floor. They floated in the air, weightless, held in his telekinetic grip. Then, he sent them flying at her. A volley of silent, speeding projectiles from all directions. Sabrina's response was immediate and breathtakingly elegant. She didn't move a muscle, but a shimmering dome of violet energy materialized around her. The first dummy slammed into it and was instantly disintegrated, its molecules ripped apart by a focused telekinetic shear. The second and third were caught in mid-air, frozen by her power, then gently set down. The rest she simply deflected, altering their trajectories with invisible gestures so they flew past her and crashed into the far wall. It was the epitome of control, a display of such fine-tuned power that it made his own raw display feel clumsy. He pushed harder, pouring more of his aura into his telekinesis, trying to brute force his way through her defenses. She met his pressure with her own. Raw force met surgical precision. A river of untamed energy crashed against a diamond-hard wall of pure will. And then, it happened. The resonance. Where their powers met, they didn't cancel each other out. They harmonized. The air between them began to glow, a soft, golden light that pulsed with both his raw energy and her controlled frequency. For a single, stunning moment, the barrier between their minds dissolved completely. Ash saw the world through her eyes. He perceived the training hall not as a physical space but as a matrix of energy, of psychic echoes and possibilities. He felt the cool, controlled hum of her own power, a vast and silent sea of consciousness. Sabrina saw through his. The world was a riot of color and emotion. She felt the unwavering loyalty of Pikachu at his feet, the deep, abiding affection he had for the floor beneath him, the structure around them, the very air they breathed. His was a world defined by connection, by feeling. The connection was exhilarating, overwhelming, and deeply intimate. It was a glimpse into the very soul of another being. They both pulled back at the same instant, the psychic link severing, the golden light fading. They stood panting, the silence of the hall rushing back in. The sparring session was over. The test was complete. They stared at each other, both shaken, both transformed. The professional respect had been burned away, replaced by something far deeper, something profound and a little frightening. They were not just allies anymore. They were two parts of a whole they were only just beginning to understand. The power plant, Ash said, his voice hoarse. We should go. Sabrina simply nodded, her violet eyes holding a new, complex light. The journey to the outskirts of Celadon City was made in a tense, charged silence. Sabrina had procured an unmarked black car, and she drove with a focused efficiency that matched her every other action. Ash sat in the passenger seat, the psychic static growing stronger with every mile, a persistent, irritating buzz at the base of his skull. Pikachu was asleep in his lap, but his rest was fitful, his ears twitching at phantom sounds. They spoke. Little, but the silence wasn't empty. After the spar, words felt superficial. They were hyper-aware of each other's presence, of the thrumming potential that lay dormant between them. Ash found himself stealing glances at her profile as she drove, the determined set of her jaw, the intense focus in her eyes. He had faced down legendary Pokémon and criminal masterminds, but he had never met anyone who felt as fundamentally powerful as the woman sitting next to him. "I spent years believing my power was a curse," Sabrina said suddenly, her voice quiet, not taking her eyes off the road. "It was a prison of noise. I built walls of silence and apathy to survive. It's only in the last few years that I've learned to see it as a tool. To build a sanctuary instead of a cell." "It's not a curse," Ash said, his voice firm with a certainty that surprised even him. "It's just a part of you. Like my bond with Pikachu. It's not always easy, but I wouldn't be me without it." She glanced at him then, and he saw a flicker of gratitude in her eyes before she turned back to the road. The car turned off the main highway, onto a cracked and weathered service road overgrown with weeds. The psychic static was a palpable force here, making the hairs on Ash's arms stand up. The decommissioned power plant loomed out of the overgrown woods like the skeleton of a great metal beast. Its twin smokestacks were stark against the gray sky, rust streaking their sides like dried blood. A chain-link fence, sagging and broken in places, surrounded the perimeter. A faded sign read, "Kanto Power and Light, Facility 7, Danger, No Trespassing." Sabrina parked the car behind a thicket of trees. "The static is strongest here," she confirmed, her eyes closed in concentration. "It's chaotic. Unfocused. But it's tainting everything it touches." They slipped through a gap in the fence, their feet crunching on gravel and dead leaves. The air was thick with the smell of decay and damp metal, and underneath it all, a sharp, ozone-like tang of wrongness. As they approached the main building, a low growl stopped them in their tracks. A pack of Mankey and a large primate blocked their path. But they weren't normal. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, their limbs twitching with spastic energy. Their fur was matted and grimy, but it was their eyes that were the most horrifying. They glowed with a sick, void-like purple light, utterly devoid of reason or life. They were husks, animated by the same hateful energy that had washed over the gym. "They're corrupted," Ash breathed, feeling a wave of nausea. He could feel their psychic presence. It was a maelstrom of pure, unthinking rage, with no trace of the creatures they once were. The primate let out a guttural roar and charged, its fists raised. The pack of Mankey scrambled after it, a tide of mindless fury. "I'll create a diversion," Sabrina called out, her hands already glowing with psionic energy. "You handle the primate." It was their first true battle as a team. Sabrina's mind became a nexus of control. She didn't attack the Mankey. She projected a complex illusion into their corrupted minds, the image of a sheer, bottomless cliff opening up right in front of them. The charging pack screeched to a halt, skidding and clawing at the ground, their programmed rage confused by the non-existent obstacle. The illusion bought Ash the opening he needed. The primate, unaffected by the targeted mental trick, was still barreling toward him. Pikachu leaped from Ash's shoulder, a yellow blur of motion. "Pikachu, Iron Tail on the ground!" Ash commanded, not with his voice, but with a pulse of intent. Pikachu spun in mid-air, his tail glowing with a metallic sheen, and slammed it into the cracked concrete. The ground shattered, sending a shower of debris upward. Ash focused, his hand outstretched, and caught the cloud of concrete shards in his telekinetic grip. With a sharp gesture, he sent the cloud flying, not as a lethal attack, but as a dense, stunning barrage that pelted the primate, forcing it to slow and shield its face. "Sabrina, its left side is open," Ash projected, a thought sent directly to her. He felt her acknowledgement. As the primate shook its head, momentarily disoriented, an invisible force slammed into its side, throwing the powerful Pokémon off balance. Sabrina's precise telekinetic shove was perfectly timed, perfectly placed. The primate stumbled, roaring in frustration. It was a dance. Sabrina was the strategist, controlling the battlefield, creating openings, feeding Ash information. Ash and Pikachu were the vanguard, the dynamic force that exploited those openings with speed and power. He would create a kinetic shield to block a desperate flurry of punches, and she would use that moment to telekinetically bind the primate's legs. The corrupted Pokémon were strong and relentless, but they were mindless. They had no strategy, only rage. Ash and Sabrina, working in perfect, silent synergy, were dismantling them piece by piece, disabling them without causing permanent harm. He would feel her intent to trip a Mankey a split second before she did it, and Pikachu would already be moving to deliver a non-lethal thunder shock to stun it. Finally, only the primate remained. It was battered, confused, but still radiating that awful purple energy. With a final, desperate roar, it charged one last time. Together, Sabrina's thought echoed in his mind. Ash braced himself, drawing his aura into a concentrated field in front of him. Sabrina focused her own power, not on a physical attack, but on the raging, corrupted mind of the Pokémon. She didn't attack it. She flooded it with a single, pure, overwhelming psychic frequency of pure, numbing white noise. The primate's glowing purple eyes flickered. Its charge faltered. For a critical second, its mindless rage was drowned out by her psychic static. In that second, Ash acted. He didn't attack. He pushed his empathic power forward, not to hurt, but to soothe, sending a wave of calm into the Pokémon's suddenly quieted mind. The primate skidded to a halt just feet from him. The purple light in its eyes faded, replaced by confusion. It looked at its own hands, then at Ash, then collapsed onto the ground, its body finally succumbing to exhaustion, its consciousness blessedly its own again. Ash let out a long breath, the adrenaline slowly receding. He looked at Sabrina. She was breathing heavily, the effort of maintaining such a powerful, precise mental assault clear on her face. A small smile of triumph and mutual respect passed between them. They had done it. Their victory was short-lived. A low, pulsing hum drew their attention to the main building. The source. They entered the power plant through a set of rusted blast doors. The inside was a vast, dark cavern of dormant turbines and silent control panels thick with dust. In the very center of the main turbine hall, the psychic static was a deafening roar. There, nestled amongst a tangle of severed power conduits, was the source. It was a geode, the size of a large pumpkin, but unlike any geode Ash had ever seen. It was jagged and black, and it pulsed with an internal, sickly purple light. Veins of the same light spiderwebbed across its surface, and the air around it crackled with raw, chaotic energy. It was Malakir's seed, a nexus of its vile power. "This is it," Sabrina whispered, her voice barely audible over the psychic noise. "It's leaking this corruption into the environment, driving the Pokémon mad." As the resident expert in psychic phenomena, the responsibility fell to her. "I have to contain it. Its energy is unstable. A direct kinetic assault might cause it to detonate." She approached it cautiously, her hands outstretched. A delicate, multi-layered shield of psychic energy formed around her, designed to analyze and neutralize the geode's emissions. Ash and Pikachu stood back, ready to act, but knowing this was a task for a scalpel, not a hammer. Sabrina's fingers, glowing with violet light, hovered just inches from the geode's surface. She was probing it, reading its structure, looking for a way to sever its connection to whatever was powering it. For a moment, it seemed to be working. The pulsing purple light began to dim. Then, the geode fought back. It wasn't a physical attack. It was a trap. The moment her mind made significant contact, it sprang. The purple light flared, and a wave of pure psychic venom erupted from the geode, bypassing her shields entirely and striking directly at her consciousness. Sabrina screamed, a real, raw, agonized sound that tore from her throat as she collapsed to the ground, her body convulsing. "Sabrina!" Ash yelled, rushing to her side. He knelt and grabbed her shoulders, and the moment he touched her, he was pulled in. He saw a glimpse of what she was seeing, a vision of pure, cosmic horror. He saw a sky of burning stars, a world consumed by a silent, psychic tempest of shadow and despair. He heard the whispers of a billion minds crying out in unison before being extinguished. He felt an ancient, vast, and utterly malevolent consciousness, a being of pure hunger and hate. It whispered a promise to Sabrina, an offer of ultimate knowledge, of a universe of thought to command, if she would only open herself to it, abandon her fragile shell of a body and join its eternal storm. He saw her soul, her very essence, beginning to fray at the edges, tempted by the sheer, terrifying scope of the offer. No! Ash roared, both aloud and in his own mind. He couldn't fight this thing on its own terms. He couldn't outthink a cosmic intelligence. So he did what he always did. He held on. He tightened his grip on her, pouring every ounce of his own being, his own stubborn, defiant heart, into her. He flooded their connection not with strategy, but with feeling. He pushed the memory of the sun on his face in Pallet Town, the taste of Brock's stew, the feeling of Pikachu's fur against his cheek, the fierce pride of watching Charizard finally obey him, the unwavering loyalty in Greninja's eyes. He sent her the image of her own small, secret smile in the photograph on her desk. He sent her the feeling of their hands joined, of their powers resonating, of the impossible, perfect harmony they had created together. He anchored her soul to the living, breathing, feeling world. He anchored her to him. The vision shattered. The whisper of Malaka receded, shrieking in frustration. The connection broke. Sabrina gasped, her eyes flying open, her violet irises swirling with terror and relief. She was back. The geode, its trap sprung and its victim escaped, pulsed one last time. With Ash's raw power and Sabrina's focused mind now unconsciously joined against it, it couldn't withstand the pressure. A web of cracks spread across its black surface. With a final, silent shriek, it imploded, crumbling into a pile of inert gray dust. The psychic static vanished. The oppressive wrongness in the air evaporated. The only sounds were their own ragged breaths. Sabrina was trembling in his arms, her usual composure utterly gone. She looked at him, her eyes full of a vulnerability he had never seen. She had touched the void, and he had pulled her back from the brink. Ash, she whispered, her voice cracking. He simply held her, providing a steady, physical presence in the echoing silence of the dead power plant. In that moment, something shifted between them, solidifying into a bond forged not just in power, but in salvation. Miles away, on a forested ridge overlooking the access road to the plant, a figure in a gray tactical suit lowered a pair of high-tech binoculars. The lenses had not been tracking light, but energy signatures. A small, hardened screen on the side of the device displayed the final reading. Energy anomaly neutralized. Primary source, resonance cascade. Target alpha, Sabrina, and target beta, Ketchum, synergy confirmed. Power output exceeds omega-level projections. The figure, his face hidden by a helmet and a polarized visor, spoke into a comms unit, his voice flat and professional. Commander Jericho. This is Scout 1. Operation Mute is a go. The saffron targets are more powerful, and more dangerous, than we anticipated. They must be contained. Immediately. Without another word, the scout packed away their equipment, the setting sun glinting off their visor. They turned and melted back into the shadows of the trees, leaving no trace they were ever there. Chapter 3, The Aegis Gambit. The drive back to Saffron City was a study in shared shock. The heavy, oppressive static was gone, leaving the air feeling unnervingly clean, like the world after a violent thunderstorm. Ash drove this time, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his jaw tight. Beside him, Sabrina sat wrapped in a borrowed jacket, her gaze fixed on the unfolding ribbon of road, but her mind was clearly miles, or eons, away. The raw terror of the vision had receded, but its shadow lingered, a cold stain on her consciousness. Neither of them spoke. Words were inadequate for what they had experienced. He could still feel the phantom chill of that cosmic void, the seductive whisper of ultimate knowledge offered at the cost of her soul. She could still feel the solid, grounding warmth of his empathic rescue, the barrage of life and love and loyalty that had been her lifeline. They were no longer just a trainer and a gym leader who happened to possess psychic abilities. They were two people who had stared into the abyss together, and one had pulled the other back. That forged a bond deeper than any conversation ever could. When they finally pulled into the underground garage of the Saffron Gym, the first hint of dawn was painting the eastern sky in shades of bruised purple and soft gray. The sanctuary was quiet, the students asleep, a fragile peace restored. Ash walked with her to the elevator, the silence between them no longer tense, but heavy with unspoken understanding. "You should get some rest," he said as the elevator doors chimed open on her residential floor. She turned to him, her violet eyes clear now, but holding a new, profound gravity. "What I saw, Ash. It wasn't just a vision. It was a consciousness. Ancient, vast, and full of hate. It called itself Malakar. I felt it," he said, his voice grim. "We stopped a leak. But the source is still out there." The geode was a seed, she agreed, a shiver running through her. "Planted to spread chaos and fear. It feeds on it. The siege on the city, the battle at the plant, we're giving it exactly what it wants. Then we have to stop it," he said with a simple, unwavering certainty. Sabrina looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the core of who he was. Not just the powerful empath or the competent trainer, but the unshakable force of will that had carried him across the world. In the face of a cosmic, soul-devouring entity, he wasn't afraid. He was resolved. A faint, tired smile touched her lips. "Get some rest, Ash Ketchum," she repeated his own words back to him. "The fight is just beginning." He watched her walk down the silent corridor and disappear into her private quarters. As the elevator doors closed, he leaned his head against the cool metal wall, the exhaustion of the last 24 hours hitting him like a physical blow. The roar of the stadium, the fear in Leo's eyes, the shattered illusion in the training hall, the corrupted Pokémon, the void in Sabrina's mind, it was a lifetime of intensity packed into a single day. Pikachu nuzzled his cheek, a silent offering of comfort and support. Ash managed a weak smile, scratching the little Pokémon behind the ears. He had come to Saffron City following a faint cry for help. Now, he was standing at the precipice of a war against a god of chaos, bound to a woman whose power and soul resonated with his own. He closed his eyes. His life was never simple. Far away, in a location that appeared on no public map, the world was anything but quiet. Deep beneath the rugged landscape of the Kanto Victory Road, in a sterile, state-of-the-art command center carved from solid rock, Commander Jericho stood before a massive holographic display. The room was a hive of quiet, disciplined activity. Men and women in gray tactical uniforms moved with brisk efficiency, their faces illuminated by the glow of data streams and tactical maps. This was the heart of the Aegis Division, the most secret and well-funded special operations unit in the Pokémon League's global security apparatus. The hologram before Jericho showed a three-dimensional rendering of the decommissioned power plant, overlaid with shimmering energy readings. The chaotic purple signature of the Malakar seed flared, then imploded, replaced by a brief, incandescent golden spike of immense power before fading to baseline. "There," Jericho said, his voice a low, commanding baritone. He pointed a gloved finger at the golden spike. "That is the resonance cascade. The harmonic synergy between target alpha and target beta. Our analysts were right." A woman with severe, dark hair and the insignia of a lead strategist on her collar stepped forward. "Commander, the output from that single event exceeded the projections by a factor of 4. It's exponentially more powerful than their individual outputs combined. If they learn to control that resonance, they won't get the chance," Jericho stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned from the hologram, his shadow falling over a large tactical table displaying a map of the Kanto region. His face was sharp, intelligent, and etched with the unwavering conviction of a zealot. His eyes, a cold, piercing gray, held no malice, only a profound, unshakable certainty. For years, he began, his voice resonating through the command center, commanding the attention of every person in the room. We have operated in the shadows. We have warned the League Council, the Elite Four, the champions. We have presented them with data, with case studies. The catastrophic psychic surge in Alto Mare that nearly drowned the city. The unknown incident in Greenfield that warped reality itself. The rogue psychics who level towns in fits of rage or despair. These are not isolated incidents. They are a pattern. A harbinger. He paced before them, his presence magnetic, his every word laced with the fire of his belief. Power of this magnitude cannot be left to the whims of individual emotion. It cannot be governed by good intentions or a strong heart. It is a force of nature, and like any hurricane or earthquake, it must be contained for the good of all. Ash Ketchum may be a hero. Sabrina may be a benefactor. But together, they are a weapon of mass destruction waiting for a trigger. That cascade could have leveled half of Celadon City. What happens when they have a disagreement? A moment of anger? Of grief? He stopped and looked around the room, meeting the eyes of his soldiers. He saw his own. Conviction reflected back at him. Many of them had their own stories, their own reasons for being here. Families lost, homes destroyed by the collateral damage of battles between godlike beings. The council has been weak, Jericho continued, his voice dropping to a steely whisper. They fear public opinion. They are blinded by the celebrity of trainers like Ketchum. So they have sanctioned us, the Aegis Division, to do what they have not the courage to do themselves. To be the shield, the Aegis, that protects the common man from the gods who walk among them. He swept his hand across the holographic table. A new directive flashed across the screen, Operation Mute, Phase 1, Initiate. The Saffron targets are too powerful, too public for a direct assault. Not yet. We will cut the head off the snake by isolating its allies. Our intelligence has identified a peripheral asset, a class, for psychic healer known only as Old Man Olin. He lives in seclusion in the mountains north of Fuchsia City. He is a known associate of Sabrina's, a mentor from her early years. He is weak, isolated, and the perfect test case for our new containment technology. A satellite image of a remote, wooded mountain appeared on the main screen, a small cabin circled in red. We will move in at dusk. Swift, silent, and absolute. We will deploy the sonic dampening field to nullify any long-range psychic communication, and our elite teams will secure the target using our new generation, 3 psionic inhibitors. No casualties. No collateral damage. Just a clean, surgical extraction. When Sabrina realizes one of her own has vanished without a trace, she will be forced to act. And we will be waiting. He looked at his assembled forces, his gaze hard as granite. People call them gifted. Special. I call them what they are, threats. And we are the solution. Prepare for deployment. A chorus of, "Yes, Commander," echoed through the chamber. The quiet hum of activity escalated into the focused, disciplined preparation for war. Jericho stood alone for a moment, watching his soldiers, his mind replaying a memory he could never erase, the image of his childhood home, not destroyed by a villain's Pokemon, but vaporized in a battle between two powerful psychics who were supposedly sparring. The world had cheered for their incredible power. He had been left with nothing but ashes and a burning, righteous purpose. He would not let that happen to anyone else. Ever. Ash awoke to the feeling of sunlight on his face. He'd fallen asleep on a comfortable sofa in a communal lounge near the gym's entrance, too exhausted to find a proper guest room. Pikachu was curled on his chest, a small, warm weight. For a moment, he felt a sense of peace. Then the memories of the power plant returned, and the peace shattered. He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The gym was stirring to life around him. Young students were heading to a morning breakfast service, their chatter a light, happy sound. It was a stark contrast to the fear of the previous night. It was a testament to Sabrina's work, to the sanctuary she had built. A sanctuary that was now on the front line of a terrifying, unseen war. He found Sabrina in the library, the room with the glowing memory crystals. She was standing before a large, empty wall, her eyes closed in concentration. As he watched, faint lines of light began to trace themselves onto the wall's surface, a complex, sprawling map of Kanto, rendered in shimmering psionic energy. Lines of power, ley lines that he had never known existed, crisscrossed the region, converging on certain key locations, Mount Moon, the Seafoam Islands, the Dragon's Denver. And now, a dark, ugly blotch pulsed where the Celadon power plant stood, a wound on the psychic landscape. "I'm mapping the energy flows," she said without opening her eyes. "Trying to find other seeds, other points of weakness." "Find anything?" he asked, stepping closer. "Only echoes," she admitted, frustration lacing her tone. The map dissolved. She turned to him, her expression serious. "But I found something else. I reached out this morning, a psychic roll call to the other major telepaths in the region. There are not many of us. An old friend of mine, a powerful healer named Olin who lives in the mountains near Fuchsia, he is not responding. His psychic signature is gone." "Gone?" Ash frowned. "Like, he's—" "No, not dead," she said quickly, a flicker of worry crossing her face. "It's more like his mind is, encased in lead. There is only a profound, unnatural silence where he should be. I have never felt anything like it." A cold dread trickled down Ash's spine. It felt too precise, too clinical to be the work of the chaotic Malakar. "You think it's connected to the attack?" "I don't know," she confessed. "But he is reclusive. He harms no one. He is one of the kindest souls I have ever known." For his mind to be silenced, she trailed off, but Ash could feel her train of thought. An attack on her friend, her mentor, was an attack on her. It was a message. "Then we go," Ash said, his decision instantaneous. Pikachu leaped to his shoulder, sensing the shift in his mood from weary to resolved. "If someone's targeting your friends, we can't just sit here and wait for them to come to us." Sabrina's gaze met his, and a silent agreement passed between them. Her worry was now sharpened by a razor's edge of anger. "The mountains are treacherous. It will be faster if we teleport." "You can teleport that far?" Ash asked, impressed. "Alone, it would be a strain. With you," she trailed off, thinking of the resonance. "With your energy to draw upon as a fuel source, it should be possible. It will require a degree of trust." "I trust you," he said without a moment's hesitation. The words were simple, but they hung in the air with the weight of absolute truth. Sabrina's composure wavered for a second. The easy, unconditional nature of his trust was something she had rarely, if ever, experienced. She gave a curt nod, hiding her reaction. "Prepare yourself. The sensation can be disorienting." She placed a hand on his shoulder. Ash put his hand over hers. He felt the connection spark to life, that familiar hum of their combined power. He closed his eyes and opened his mind to her, not the chaotic flood of emotion from their spar, but a steady, willing offering of his energy. He felt her draw on his aura, siphoning his raw, kinetic power and refining it, shaping it. The world dissolved into a dizzying, non-physical transit. It was not like moving through space, but like space itself was being rewritten around them. For a disorienting instant, he was everywhere and nowhere. Then, with a sudden lurch, reality reasserted itself. The quiet, sterile air of the gym was replaced by the cold, sharp scent of pine and damp earth. They were standing on a high mountain trail, a biting wind whipping at their clothes. Below them, a dense forest stretched for miles. Above, jagged gray peaks clawed at the overcast sky. The silence was the first thing they noticed. Not the natural quiet of the wilderness, but a dead, artificial stillness. There were no bird calls. No rustling of Pokemon in the undergrowth. There was just the sound of the wind. And the silence in his mind was even worse. The constant, low-level hum of life, of the emotions of the creatures around him that was a constant companion to his senses, was gone. It was like going suddenly deaf. Sonic dampening field, Sabrina breathed, her eyes wide with horrified realization. High-frequency sonic waves that disrupt not only sound, but psychic wavelengths. This is advanced technology. This is not Malacca. They were in a trap. They moved quickly down the trail, their boots sinking into the muddy ground. The unnatural silence was deeply unsettling. Even Pikachu was unnaturally still on Ash's shoulder, his senses deprived. After a few minutes, they found it, a small, rustic cabin nestled in a clearing, a thin wisp of smoke rising from its stone chimney. But the cabin was surrounded. At the edge of the clearing, almost invisible in their gray camouflage, were soldiers. They moved with a silent, predatory grace that spoke of intense training. They weren't League security. They were something else entirely. Ash saw the strange, rifle-like devices they carried, the advanced-looking tech mounted on their helmets. Aegis, Sabrina whispered, her voice laced with a dawning, venomous understanding. A radical, clandestine faction. They believe powerful psychics are a threat to be contained. I thought they were just a political rumor, a conspiracy theory. Looks like they're real, Ash said grimly, his eyes scanning the perimeter, counting at least 10 hostiles. They hadn't been spotted yet. They're trapping him. The sonic field is to stop him from calling for help. We can't just blast our way in, Sabrina reasoned, her mind working furiously. Their technology is specifically designed to counter us. A direct psychic assault would be useless, and a Pokemon battle would risk Olin's life. This has to be surgical. Then we give them a different kind of war, Ash said, a strategic glint in his eye. He looked at the steep, rocky slope above them, at the loose scree and precariously balanced boulders. He looked at the dense forest, at the thick trunks of the ancient trees. The environment was their ally. I'll create a diversion, he murmured, his mind already formulating a plan. A big one. Draw their attention to the west. When they move to investigate, you slip in, get Olin, and get out. We meet back at the teleportation point. Ash, that's too risky. They'll converge on you. Let them, he said with a confident smirk. I'm good at running. Before she could argue, he gave her a final, meaningful look. Get your friend, Sabrina. He didn't wait for a reply. He and Pikachu melted back into the trees, circling around the clearing. Sabrina watched him go, a storm of conflict in her mind. His plan was reckless, but it was also their best option. Relying on him, on his chaotic, brilliant improvisation, was a foreign feeling. But she trusted him. Ash positioned himself on the ridge overlooking the clearing from the west. He could see the Aegis soldiers moving into their final positions, tightening the net around the cabin. He took a deep breath, planting his feet firmly on the ground. He closed his eyes and reached out, not with his mind, but with his kinetic sense. He felt the mountain. The stress lines in the rock, the weight of a massive boulder balanced precariously 100 feet above the Aegis line. He focused his aura, a river of power flowing from his core, down his arms, and into the earth beneath him. The ground began to vibrate. A low hum filled the air, overriding the sonic. Dampening. The Aegis soldiers stopped, looking around in confusion. Then, with a final, grunting push of his will, Ash unleashed the energy. The vibration became a localized tremor. The massive boulder on the ridge shifted, teetered, and then with a deafening crack, it broke free. It crashed down the mountainside, bringing an avalanche of smaller rocks and debris with it. It wasn't aimed at the soldiers, but at a point 100 yards past them, a thunderous, chaotic display of natural force. Rock slide. West flank. Go, 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 a voice barked over the Aegis comms. As predicted, half the squad broke formation, moving to investigate the natural disaster. The diversion was perfect. Sabrina seized the opportunity. She moved from the trees like a ghost, a shadow flitting across the clearing. She reached the cabin door just as two Aegis soldiers, armed with the strange inhibitor rifles, were about to breach it. They never saw her coming. She didn't touch them. She projected a simple, devastating illusion directly into their minds, the image of their own commander standing behind them, ordering them to stand down. They froze, their disciplined minds utterly derailed by the conflicting orders. In that moment of hesitation, an invisible force of telekinetic power slammed into their helmets, cracking their visors and sending them crumpling to the ground, unconscious. She slipped inside the cabin. It was simple, warm. An old man with a kind, wrinkled face and a long white beard sat in a rocking chair by the fire. He looked up at her, his eyes full of fear and confusion. He wasn't physically bound, but she could feel it. A collar-like device around his neck was emitting a smothering, nullifying field, cutting him off from his own mind. "Sabrina, my child," he rasped, his voice weak. "How?" "No time, Olin," she said gently, her hands already working on the complex magnetic clasp of the inhibitor collar. "A friend is buying us time." Meanwhile, Ash was leading the Aegis squad on a merry chase through the forest. He was a phantom. They would corner him in a dense thicket, only for him to have vanished, the only evidence of his passing a few swaying branches. He and Pikachu worked in perfect concert. Pikachu would use quick attack to create a flash of movement to the north, drawing their fire, while Ash used his kinetic abilities to trip them with tree roots from the south. He wasn't fighting them, he was playing with them, hurting them, sowing chaos and frustration. "Commander, we have a problem," the squad leader reported into his comms, panting as he tried to get a lock on the blur of motion that was Ash. "The secondary target is evasive. He's toying with us. And he's not using psychic abilities. It's some kind of kinetic field manipulation. Our inhibitors are having no effect." The response from Jericho, back in his command center, was cold and immediate. "He is a distraction. The primary target is the healer. All units, converge back on the objective. Subdue the asset at any cost. I want the healer." The soldiers changed tactics instantly, abandoning their pursuit of Ash and racing back toward the cabin. Ash's eyes widened. The game was up. "Pikachu, we have to stop them." But just as the Aegis squad burst back into the clearing, Sabrina emerged from the cabin, supporting the frail Olin. She was exposed. "Fire," the squad leader commanded. The inhibitor rifles whined as they charged, preparing to fire beams of energy designed to overload a psychic's nervous system. They never got the chance. Ash, seeing Sabrina and Olin in the open, acted on pure instinct. He leaped from the tree line, landing between them and the soldiers. He threw his hands out in front of him, and the air itself seemed to solidify. A massive, shimmering wall of pure kinetic force, 10 feet high and 20 feet wide, erupted from the ground. It was translucent, like warped glass, and it pulsed with his raw, untamed power. The inhibitor beams slammed into it, splashing harmlessly against its surface like water against rock. The Aegis soldiers stared in disbelief. Their ultimate anti-psychic weapon was useless. The momentary stalemate was broken by a voice that was not shouted, but broadcast directly into their helmets via a secure frequency. It was cold, calm, and radiated absolute authority. "Enough." A large transport dropship, painted in matte black with no insignia, descended from the low-hanging clouds, its engine surprisingly quiet. It landed softly in the clearing. The ramp lowered, and a single figure walked out. It was Commander Jericho. He was dressed in a dark gray officer's uniform, his posture impeccable, his presence immediately commanding the attention of the entire clearing. He looked not at Sabrina or Olin, but directly at Ash, his gray eyes analytical and unblinking. "Ash Ketchum," Jericho said, his voice calm and reasonable, as if they were having a conversation over coffee. You are interfering with a sanctioned operation of the Pokémon League Global Security Force. That shield is an impressive, if crude, display of Omega-level kinetic ability. But it is unregistered, uncontrolled, and therefore, a threat. The only threat I see here is you, Ash shot back, his arms trembling from the strain of holding the massive shield. Attacking an old man in his home? What kind of security is that? The necessary kind, Jericho replied smoothly, taking a step forward. His power, like yours, like Sabrina's, is a variable in an equation that demands stability. We are that stability. We are the ones willing to do what is necessary to prevent the next Alto Mare, the next Greenfield. We are the protectors. You are the risk. His words were not spoken with anger, but with the unshakable conviction of a surgeon explaining a necessary amputation. He wasn't a monster. In his own mind, he was a hero. And that made him infinitely more dangerous. This was a warning, Jericho said, his gaze shifting to include Sabrina. A demonstration of our reach and our capability. Surrender the healer, and you can walk away. For now. Resist, and we will be forced to escalate. Sabrina helped Olin take a step back, her own power coiling, ready to strike. Ash held the shield, his muscles screaming, knowing that the moment he dropped it, the battle would turn deadly. They were at an impasse, a standoff between raw power and ideological certainty. The air crackled with tension, the fate of the kind old healer and the future of their conflict hanging in the balance, resting on a shimmering wall of pure will. Chapter 4, A Library of Whispers. The air in the mountain clearing was thick with the tension of a drawn bowstring. Ash's kinetic shield, a shimmering testament to his raw power, held firm against the silent, menacing threat of the Aegis soldiers. Their inhibitor rifles were still aimed, ready to fire the instant his defense wavered. Jericho stood before them, a figure of calm, fanatical certainty, his argument hanging in the cold air like a poison. He wasn't a villain monologuing, he was a general stating the terms of engagement. You talk about protecting people, Ash ground out, sweat beading on his forehead from the immense strain of maintaining the shield. But you terrorize an old man and point weapons at people you don't understand. That isn't protection. It's tyranny. Jericho's expression didn't change. Understanding is a luxury. Safety is a necessity. Your very existence, uncontrolled and unmonitored, jeopardizes that safety. This is not personal. It is policy. Behind the shield, Sabrina's mind was racing. A direct confrontation was a losing battle. They were outnumbered, and while their power was immense, Aegis's technology and discipline were formidable. Olin was weak, and she and Ash were still recovering from their encounter with Malakir Seed. They needed to escape, but teleportation required concentration she couldn't afford in a firefight. A thought, clear and concise as a shard of ice, entered Ash's mind. The ground beneath his feet. He's too stable. It was Sabrina. A silent, strategic suggestion. Ash understood instantly. He couldn't drop the shield, but he could reshape it. With a defiant roar, he shifted his focus. He didn't release the shield, but instead siphoned a portion of its energy, driving it down into the earth. The muddy ground beneath Jericho and his forward soldiers suddenly liquefied, turning from solid earth to thick, churning mud. Jericho's calm finally broke as his polished boots sank, his soldiers stumbling as their footing vanished. It was the moment of chaos they needed. Now, Ash. Sabrina's command was a psychic thunderclap. She didn't wait for him. A wave of telekinetic force, precise and invisible, slammed into the disoriented soldiers, not to injure, but to shove, to send them staggering back into one another. At the same instant, Ash dropped the shield and converted all his energy into a single, focused push. He didn't target the soldiers, he targeted the air itself, creating a concussive blast of wind that kicked up a blinding storm of dirt, leaves, and mud. The clearing was thrown into chaos. Under the cover of the confusion, Sabrina grabbed Ash's arm, her other hand firmly supporting Olin. Hold on. The world dissolved again. The frantic shouts of the Aegis soldiers, the smell of mud and pine, the biting wind, it all vanished, replaced by the dizzying, placeless sensation of teleportation. Ash gritted his teeth, pouring his remaining energy into the transit, acting as the battery for their escape. The journey felt longer this time, more draining, a desperate flight through the ether. They rematerialized not in the Saffron Gym, but in a location Ash recognized instantly, the sprawling, book-lined laboratory of Professor Oak. They stumbled out of the teleport, landing in a heap on the floor. Olin collapsed, wheezing, while Ash fell to one knee, panting, the world spinning around him. The rapid expenditure of so much energy, first for the shield and then for the teleport, had left him feeling hollowed out. "My word," a familiar voice exclaimed. Professor Oak, who had been examining a slide under a microscope, nearly fell out of his chair in surprise. "Ash. Sabrina. What in the name of Arceus is going on?" Tracy Sketchit, the professor's assistant, rushed forward to help Olin, his expression a mixture of shock and concern. "Professor," Ash gasped, getting his breath back. "We need your help. And we need to be fast. They'll be looking for us." An hour later, the story had been told. They sat around the professor's large oak table, mugs of hot tea steaming in their hands. Olin, the inhibitor collar removed and now resting comfortably in an armchair, had confirmed Sabrina's fears. Aegis was real, well-funded, and operating with the tacit, deniable approval of certain fearful factions within the Pokémon League government. Their goal was the complete containment of all powerful, unregistered psychics, whom they had designated Omega level. Professor Oak listened, his usually jovial face grim, his fingers steepled before him. He processed the information not just as Ash's mentor, but as one of the world's leading scientific minds. "Aegis is one problem," Oak said, his voice heavy. "Their ideology is dangerous, a symptom of a world growing more afraid of power it cannot quantify. But this other entity, this Malakar, that sounds like a disease. A threat not just to psychics, but to the entire planet." He looked from Ash to Sabrina. "And it seems you two are the only ones with the specific antibodies to fight it." "We're fighting blind," Sabrina stated, her voice regaining its strength. "We destroyed a seed, but we have no idea how to find the source. Modern science, modern psychic theory, none of it has any reference to a consciousness of this scale." "Then we must look to a time before modern science," Oak said, his eyes gleaming with intellectual fervor. He stood and walked to a dusty, locked cabinet at the far end of the lab. "When dealing with myths, one must consult the myth keepers." He pulled out a specialized, long-range video phone and dialed a number from memory. A few moments later, a familiar face appeared on the screen. It was Brock, looking older, more mature, his brow furrowed in concentration as he examined a rock sample. He was in a large, well-lit tent, geological maps and ancient-looking tablets strewn on the table behind him. "Professor Oak." "Ash." Brock's face broke into a wide, surprised grin. "What's up?" "I was just about to log my findings on the sedimentary composition of the lower Ilex forest. Turns out the stratification is completely different from, geology talk." "It's good to see you, Brock," Ash said, a genuine warmth spreading through him at the sight of his old friend. "We need your expertise. Not on rocks, exactly. More on what's written on them." Quickly, they explained the situation, focusing on the psychic entity, the feelings of ancient hatred, and the name Sabrina had heard, Malakar. As they spoke, Brock's expression shifted from friendly curiosity to intense, scholarly focus. He began pulling tablets and scrolls from his collection, his hands moving with practiced ease. "Malakar," Brock mused, his eyes scanning a weathered piece of slate. "The name isn't in any standard historical text. But in some of the oldest pre-Giotto oral traditions, it's not a name. It's a description. It translates roughly to the silent tempest or the formless rage." He held up a tablet to the camera. It was covered in faint, angular etchings. These are from a dig site deep beneath the ruins of a critique city. They speak of a time before the brass tower, before even the first human settlements. A time when the world was young, and the veil between the physical and the spiritual was thin. They say the raw, chaotic emotions of the newborn world, the fear of the dark, the rage of the storm, the despair of the hunted, coalesced into a single, ravenous consciousness. It had no body, no single mind. It was a psychic plague that fed on negative emotion, threatening to consume all life in a wave of mindless despair. Ash and Sabrina exchanged a look. It was exactly what they had felt from the geode. How was it stopped? Sabrina asked, leaning closer to the screen. The texts are fragmented, Brock admitted, tracing the etchings with his finger. They speak of a great convergence. 3 guardians were key. The guardian of the sea, who calmed the world's rage. The guardian of time, who wove a cage outside the normal flow of existence. And the guardian of origin, who provided the spark of pure, positive life force to seal the prison. Lugia, Shalebi, and Mew, Ash breathed, a chill running down his spine. He had encountered all 3. He had seen their power firsthand. Exactly, Brock confirmed. But they didn't act alone. The carvings show other figures fighting alongside them. Not Pokemon. Humans. Or at least, human-like. Their hands are glowing, and they are depicted weaving patterns of light, holding the silent tempest at bay while the guardians prepared the seal. They were ancient psychics. He switched to another tablet, this one showing a more detailed carving. It depicted a central figure, a man with wild hair and a determined expression, a glowing staff in his hand. He stood at the head of the psychic host, a spear of golden light erupting from his chest. The leader of this ancient psychic conclave, Brock explained, his voice full of academic excitement, is referred to only as the anchor. The texts say his power was not precise or subtle. It was a raw, untamed wellspring of empathic and kinetic energy. He didn't fight the tempest with intricate mental constructs, he overwhelmed it with the sheer, unyielding force of his own spirit, his connection to the life around him. It says his bloodline was scattered, but his potential, his aura, would re-emerge in times of great need. A profound silence fell over the lab. Professor Oak slowly turned his gaze to Ash, his eyes wide with a stunning realization. Ash himself felt a jolt, as if a missing piece of his own life's puzzle had just been slammed into place. His strange powers, his uncanny connection to Pokemon, the revelations at the Tree of Beginning, it was all connected. He was a descendant, a spiritual or genetic heir, to this anchor. Brock, Ash said, his voice hoarse, where can we find more? We need more than just legends. We need a location, a weak point, anything. Most of these texts are dead ends, Brock said apologetically. But there is one place that is mentioned repeatedly as a center of ancient lore, a place where knowledge of the old ways might have survived. It's a long shot, but, the Dragon Clan of Blackthorn City. The journey to Blackthorn City was a world away from their desperate flight from Aegis. Professor Oak had arranged for a private, high-speed transport, calling in favors and using his considerable influence to ensure their passage was discreet. Olin remained behind, safe under the professor's protection. The trip gave Ash and Sabrina something they hadn't had yet, time. Time to breathe, to think, and to talk. They sat across from each other in the comfortable cabin of the transport, the landscapes of Johto blurring past the window. So, Ash said, breaking the comfortable silence. The anchor. I guess that explains a few things. He flexed his hand, watching a faint golden light shimmer around his fingers. I always just thought I was weird. You are weird, Ash Ketchum, Sabrina replied, but there was a soft, teasing light in her eyes that stripped the words of any sting. But it seems your weirdness might be the key to saving the world. She grew serious again. That power, the empathy, the raw kinetic force, it's what pulled me from Malakar's vision. Your spirit was literally an anchor for my mind. The weight of that moment in the power plant still hung between them. It was a shared trauma, a shared victory, a point of intimacy so profound it defied words. I was so scared, Ash admitted, his voice quiet. He wasn't used to admitting fear. But with her, it felt safe. When I saw what it was showing you, when I felt you start to slip. For a second, I thought I'd lost you. Sabrina's mask of cool control faltered. She looked down at her hands, which were resting on the table between them. In that moment, the universe of knowledge it offered felt more real than my own life. More tempting. It promised an end to the loneliness, the burden of being separate. She looked up, her violet eyes meeting his. Your feelings were the only thing that felt more real. The memory of your Pikachu, your friends, the feeling of our powers combining in the training hall. It was loud, chaotic, and messy. It was life. And it was better than all the cold, perfect knowledge in the universe. Slowly. Tentatively, she reached across the table and placed her hand on his. Her skin was cool, but a current of warmth passed between them, the familiar hum of their psychic resonance. Ash instinctively turned his hand over and laced his fingers with hers. It felt natural. Right. You're not separate anymore, he said quietly. Neither of us are. They didn't pull away. They sat there for a long time, hands joined, the silent conversation of their shared resonance speaking volumes. They spoke of their childhoods, of the burdens and the unexpected joys of their powers. He told her about the difficult years of trying to understand his aura, the solitude of his training on Mount Silver where he learned to control the kinetic force by sparring with his own powerful Pokémon. She told him of her lonely childhood, a prisoner in her own home, her immense telepathic power isolating her from a world she couldn't block out, until she finally learned to build shields not of anger, but of peace, and turn her prison into a sanctuary. They were two lonely islands who had just discovered they were part of the same continent. The attraction that had sparked in the Saffron Gym, born of mutual power and respect, was now deepening, nurtured by shared vulnerability and genuine understanding. By the time they arrived in Blackthorn City, the sun was setting, casting long shadows from the dragon-crested peaks that surrounded the isolated community. The air was cool and crisp. The city, carved into the side of a mountain, had an ancient, timeless quality. Claire, the city's formidable gym leader, was waiting for them. Professor Oak's call had preceded them. She stood with her arms crossed, her expression stern, her powerful dragonair coiled behind her. Professor Oak said it was a matter of global importance, Claire said, her sharp eyes assessing them. He was not exaggerating, it seems. I can feel the tension in the world's energy. It's like a string pulled too tight. The dragon Pokémon are restless. We believe the cause is an ancient entity called Malakar, Sabrina explained. We were told the dragon clan might have records of it. Claire's expression tightened. The Silent Tempest. We do not speak that name. It is a tale to frighten young drakes. Come. The elder has been expecting you. She led them through the city, past houses carved from rock, to the entrance of the dragon's den, a vast, dark cave pulsating with a palpable, ancient energy. The energy was draconic, powerful, and primal. It was different from Ash's aura or Sabrina's psychic power, but it was just as potent. They descended deep into the earth, down spiraling stone steps lit by glowing crystals. The air grew warmer, humming with power. Finally, they reached the heart of the den, a massive, circular chamber. In the center was a small, subterranean lake of unbelievable clarity. But it was the walls that commanded their attention. They were covered, from floor to ceiling, in immense, intricate murals, carved directly into the stone and inlaid with veins of glowing minerals. It was a library of whispers, a history book written in stone. An old woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles and her eyes as bright and sharp as a shard of obsidian, stood waiting for them. She was the elder of the dragon clan. The anchor and the savant, the elder said, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. She looked not at their faces, but at the faint auras of power that surrounded them. Your arrival was foreseen. The dragons have been dreaming of a golden light and a violet star entwined. She gestured to the murals. Our history is long. We remember what the world of metal and glass has forgotten. Behold. Ash and Sabrina stepped closer, their eyes wide. The murals depicted the story Brock had told them, but in breathtaking detail. They saw the formless, shadowy chaos of Malakir sweeping across a primordial world. They saw the towering, majestic forms of Lugia, Shalebi, and Mew, rendered in glowing silver, green, and pink minerals. And they saw the ancient psychics. A host of human figures, their bodies alight with psionic energy, waging a war of the mind against the darkness. Sabrina instinctively reached out and touched the carving of a woman whose head was surrounded by a complex halo of violet light. A savant. Ash's gaze was drawn to the central figure, the anchor. He was just as Brock had described, a man radiating raw, untamed power. The muralist had captured the wild, defiant energy in his eyes, the sheer force of will that held back the tide of despair. Ash felt a startling, visceral connection to the image, a sense of looking at a distant, powerful reflection of himself. Our clan fought alongside them, the elder explained. Our dragons lent their strength to the guardians. It was a war fought on two fronts, the physical, and the spiritual. But even with the power of the guardians and the psychic host, the tempest could not be destroyed. It was a fundamental part of the world's emotional spectrum. To destroy it would be to destroy rage, fear, and despair itself, to lobotomize the very soul of the planet. So they imprisoned it, Sabrina breathed, her eyes tracing the lines of the mural that showed the final sealing. They saw the psychics weaving a cage of light, Lugia calming the entity's rage, Shalebi wrapping it in threads of time, and Mew delivering the final, sealing spark. A prison outside of time, locked by the combined will of gods and mortals, the elder confirmed. But no prison is eternal. The seal has been weakening for centuries, accelerated by the growing conflicts and fears of your modern world. The seed you found was one of the first cracks in the wall. The tremors will only grow stronger. Ash walked along the wall, his hand hovering over the ancient stone. He could feel the faint, residual echoes of the power that had been unleashed in this long-forgotten war. He felt the courage, the desperation, the hope. He stopped at the final panel of the mural. It depicted the world at peace, with a single, ominous warning carved beneath it in ancient runes. "What does that say?" he asked. It was Sabrina who answered, her mind effortlessly translating the ancient language. Her voice was a soft, haunted whisper. "The cage will hold as long as the world is in balance. But should a new storm of hatred arise, the old one will awaken to its call. The tempest feeds on conflict. War is its key." A chilling realization dawned on them both. Aegis. Jericho's crusade, his war on psychics, his spreading of fear and paranoia, he wasn't just a human antagonist. He was a pawn. His actions, his entire ideology, were creating the exact emotional chaos that Malakir needed to break its chains. Jericho thought he was saving the world, but he was inadvertently ringing the dinner bell for the entity that would devour it. They were fighting a war on two fronts, just like the ancients. One against the fanatical certainty of men, the other against the formless hunger of a god. As this terrifying truth settled over them, Ash looked at Sabrina. The weight of it all was immense, enough to crush a person. But as he looked at her, standing there in the ancient, humming darkness of the dragon's den, her face illuminated by the glowing murals, he didn't feel fear. He felt a strange, fierce clarity. He reached out and took her hand again. Their fingers interlaced, a familiar, comforting gesture. Their resonance flared to life, a quiet, warm aura in the cool air of the cave. It was a light of their own, a balance of power and precision, of heart and mind. In that moment, looking at the depiction of an ancient war and facing the prospect of a new one, they were not just allies or partners. They were a single, unified front. The anchor and the savant, their roles in this ancient drama suddenly, terrifyingly clear. Chapter 5, Siege of the Sanctuary. The return to Saffron City was heavy with the weight of revelation. The knowledge from the dragon's den had transformed their struggle. This was no longer a series of isolated incidents, but a race against a divine and ancient apocalypse. Jericho and his Aegis zealots were not just an obstacle, they were the very catalyst for the end of the world, their crusade of fear and control, the key turning in Malakar's lock. The urgency was a palpable thing, a knot tightening in Ash's chest. He and Sabrina spent the next 2 days in a blur of intense preparation. They turned the Saffron Gym into a war room. Sabrina, with her vast telepathic reach, began creating a clandestine network, a psychic early warning system. She reached out to trusted psychics across the globe, not just powerful telepaths, but simple empaths, telekinetics, and clairvoyants, anyone who could act as a sensor, a listening post for the telltale psychic static of a Malakar seed or the unnatural silence of an Aegis operation. It was a network built on whispers and trust, invisible to any technology. Ash, meanwhile, focused on defense. He worked with Sabrina's instructors, his practical, battle-honed mind a perfect complement to their theoretical knowledge. He helped them reinforce the gym's physical and psychic defenses, not with technology, but with the raw power of their own students. He taught them his own crude but effective methods of kinetic shielding, showing them how to ground themselves, how to feel the intent behind an attack, how to use their environment. He trained them not as soldiers, but as protectors, turning the gym from a school into a fortress, a sanctuary that could fight back. Their work together was a seamless dance. He would be in the training hall, demonstrating how to redirect a practice energy blast, and he'd feel her thought in his mind: the eastern wall is structurally weaker. Reinforce it with a kinetic lattice. He'd be on the roof, scanning the horizon, and she'd appear beside him with a tray of food, a silent understanding that he hadn't eaten in hours. Their partnership deepened with every passing moment, the lines between their minds and their lives blurring. They were two generals preparing for a siege, finding solace and strength in each other's presence. On the evening of the third day, the warning came. Not from a satellite or a scout, but from a young empath in the Kanto countryside, a girl who could feel the emotions of plants. She sent a frantic, terrified pulse to Sabrina's network, a wave of cold, metallic fear, an unnatural silence sweeping across the land, a feeling of wrongness that was making the trees themselves recoil. Sabrina's eyes snapped open from her meditative trance. She was in her office, Ash standing guard by the window. "They're coming," she said, her voice grim. "A massive force. Moving on Saffron City from all sides. Jericho is done with warnings." Ash's hand went to the poke ball on his belt. "Let him come." The attack began not with an explosion, but with a sound. A low, pervasive hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was the sonic dampening field, deployed on a massive, citywide scale. The cheerful chatter of Saffron City died. The psychic network Sabrina had so carefully built was instantly deafened, the connection to her outlying sensors severed. They were isolated. An island in a sea of encroaching silence. From the windows of the gym, they watched it unfold. Gray, unmarked Aegis vehicles blockaded every major road leading into the city center. Squads of soldiers, clad in their signature tactical gear, moved with terrifying efficiency, establishing a perimeter. But the true threat was the machinery they were deploying, huge, tripod-like towers being erected at key intersections. Psionic dampening emitters, Sabrina identified them, her voice tight with anger. They project a field that destabilizes and neutralizes concentrated psychic energy. The gym's primary shields won't last long against a coordinated barrage. A citywide announcement, broadcast from the Aegis vehicles, echoed through the unnervingly quiet streets. It was Jericho's voice, calm and authoritative. "Citizens of Saffron City. A state of emergency has been declared. A dangerous, unregistered Omega-level psychic phenomenon has been located within the Saffron Gym. For your safety, we are establishing a quarantine zone. Please remain in your homes. We are here to ensure your protection." It was a masterful stroke of propaganda. He wasn't attacking a gym, he was containing a threat. He wasn't a conqueror, he was a protector. Inside the gym, the atmosphere was thick with tension, but not panic. The instructors rallied their students, moving them to the most secure, central chambers. Ash stood with Sabrina in the main atrium, the heart of their fortress. He looked at the young, determined faces of her students, their hands glowing with faint psionic light as they prepared to defend their home. "You've taught them well," Ash said to her, his voice a low rumble. "They're not afraid." "I taught them to control their power," Sabrina replied, her gaze sweeping over her charges. "You taught them how to fight with it." She met his eyes, a universe of trust passing between them in that single look. "You are our champion, Ash. Hold the front line. I will command the defense from here. I am the mind of this fortress. You are its sword." He gave a sharp, confident nod. "No one gets through." Pikachu leaped onto his shoulder, his cheeks crackling with defiant energy. Alakazam materialized beside Sabrina, its spoons glowing, ready to act as her telepathic amplifier. The siege had begun. "All units," Jericho's voice commanded from his mobile command center outside the city, "target the primary generator on the gym's roof. We bring down their shield, we end this in minutes. Commence firing." On his command, the emitter towers whined to life. Beams of distorted, colorless energy lanced through the air, converging on the apex of the gym's dome. The gym's main psychic shield, a beautiful, shimmering dome of violet light powered by a massive crystal generator and amplified by Sabrina herself, flared into view as the beams struck it. It held, but ripples of strain spread across its surface. "The shield is buckling," an instructor yelled. "The frequency of their attack is destabilizing the crystal matrix." Sabrina's eyes were closed, her brow furrowed in concentration, her entire being focused on reinforcing the shield. Alakazam stood beside her, its own power flowing into hers, but it wasn't enough. The Aegis attack was relentless, a sustained, brutal assault. "I'll buy you more time," Ash yelled. He turned and sprinted towards a service elevator. "Pikachu, let's go." He emerged onto the flat roof of the gym, the wind whipping at his jacket. The sky was a terrifying web of energy beams, all converging on the shield just feet above his head. He could see the Aegis soldiers on the rooftops of the surrounding buildings, their forms small and distant. He was completely exposed. "They want the generator. They'll have to go through me," Ash shouted into the wind. He released 2 more pokeballs. The ground shook as his sceptile landed. In a low crouch, blades on its arms ready for action. With a deafening roar, Charizard burst forth, his massive wings beating the air, a plume of flame erupting from his maw in a defiant challenge. "Charizard, flamethrower." "Not at the soldiers, at the beams," Ash commanded. It was a crazy idea, a desperate gamble. Charizard didn't hesitate. He unleashed a massive torrent of fire, not at a distant rooftop, but directly upward into the energy web. The result was spectacular. The superheated plasma of the flamethrower interacted with the psionic dampening energy, causing a violent, explosive reaction. The beams sputtered and dispersed, the focused assault momentarily broken. On the streets below, Jericho's eyes widened as he watched the tactical display. "What was that? What is he doing?" "Commander," an analyst reported, "his Pokémon's energy attack is causing a feedback loop in the emitter beams. He's disrupting the network." "Then change tactics." Jericho snarled, his composure cracking for the first time. "He's on the roof, exposed. Deploy the Raptor units. Take him down." From the back of several large Aegis transports, sleek, aerial combat drones, the Raptors, were launched. They were fast, agile, and armed with laser cannons and concussion missiles. A squadron of 12 swarmed toward the gym roof, their engines screaming. "Sceptile, Leaf Blade. Pikachu, Thunderbolt. Let's show them what we've got." Ash yelled, a fierce grin on his face. This was a battle he understood. The rooftop became a whirlwind of motion. Charizard engaged the raptors in fiery dogfights, his roars echoing across the city. Sceptile was a green blur, leaping from ledge to ledge with impossible agility, his leaf blades slicing through the metal wings of drones that flew too low. Pikachu, perched on the edge of the roof, unleashed precise, powerful thunderbolts that arced through the sky, taking down raptors with pinpoint accuracy. Ash was the conductor of the chaotic symphony. His mind was a nexus, connected to his 3 Pokémon. He felt a raptor coming up behind Charizard and sent a warning pulse. Charizard rolled and blasted it without even looking. He saw a missile lock onto Sceptile and used a quick kinetic shove to push his Pokémon out of the way an instant before impact. It was a breathtaking display of synergy, for beings fighting as one. But for every drone they took down, 2 more seemed to take its place. An explosion sent Charizard careening back, his wing clipped. Sceptile was being pinned down by concentrated laser fire. They were being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Inside, Sabrina felt the brief respite end as the emitter beams refocused, slamming into the shield with renewed ferocity. Cracks began to appear in the violet dome. They were running out of time. It was then that the first unexpected blessing arrived. A massive geyser of water erupted from a fire hydrant on the street below, shooting 100 feet into the air and dousing one of the main emitter towers. The tower sparked, sputtered, and went dead. From a side street, a fiery redhead on a bicycle skidded to a halt. "Ha! Take that, you high-tech bullies!" Misty shouted, her face alight with righteous fury. Behind her, her Gyarados rose up, its immense form towering over the Aegis vehicles. It let out a deafening roar of challenge, its eyes blazing. "And don't forget about us," another voice called out. Brock skidded around a corner in a commandeered maintenance cart, several of his powerful rock-type Pokémon, Golem, Onix, and Steelix, rolling and slithering behind him. Ash never was one for fighting alone. They had come. His oldest friends, unable to stand by while he was in trouble, had broken through the soft perimeter and thrown themselves into the fray. Jericho slammed his fist on the console. Unidentified hostiles. An unregistered Gyarados and multiple rock types. All ground units, engage. Neutralize them. The siege of the Saffron Gym had just become a street-level war. Misty's Pokémon turned the heart of Saffron City into a flash flood. Her Starmie and Golduck unleashed a coordinated hydro pump, creating a powerful current that short-circuited Aegis tech and swept soldiers off their feet. Her Gyarados was a force of nature, its massive body crashing through blockades, its hyper beam blasting Aegis tanks. Brock was the strategist on the ground. His own Pokémon were a living barricade, providing cover for Misty's assault. But his true value was his knowledge. "Misty, aim for the power conduits at the base of the towers," he yelled, pointing. "Their energy shielding is weakest there." Following his direction, Misty's water Pokémon began systematically targeting the structural weaknesses of the Aegis deployment. One by one, the emitter towers began to fail. The pressure on the gym's main shield lessened dramatically. Sabrina felt it instantly. The cracks began to heal. She took a deep, shuddering breath and opened her eyes. The immediate danger to the shield had passed. But Ash was still in trouble. On the roof, Ash and his Pokémon were cornered. A new wave of raptors, sleeker and more heavily armed, had joined the attack. Charizard was grounded, one wing badly damaged. Sceptile was panting, covered in scrapes. A lucky shot had grazed Ash's arm, tearing his jacket and leaving a searing burn. Pikachu grunted, stumbling, exhausted from the constant output of electricity. "I know, buddy," Ash said, gritting his teeth as he created a small kinetic barrier to deflect a hail of laser fire. "Just a little longer." "Commander," the Raptor Squadron leader reported, "Target Beta is pinned. His Pokémon are reaching their limits. We're moving in for capture." "Affirmative," Jericho's voice replied, a hint of grim satisfaction in his tone. Take him alive. His power is too valuable to destroy. The elite raptors converged, their capture claws and containment fields humming to life. Ash braced himself, pulling his exhausted Pokémon close, preparing for a final, desperate stand. But Sabrina was no longer on the defensive. With the main shield stabilized, she turned her full, formidable attention to the battle on the roof. She became the eye of the storm. The lead raptor pilot suddenly saw 1,000 copies of Charizard filling the sky, all of them roaring, all of them breathing fire. He screamed and swerved, crashing into one of his wingmen. Another pilot found his controls frozen, his drone spinning helplessly before Sabrina sent it hurtling into another. She wasn't just creating illusions, she was waging a war of the mind, a campaign of sensory overload and telepathic sabotage against the Aegis pilots and their drones. The aerial assault fell into utter chaos. Drones fired on each other, crashed into buildings, or simply fell from the sky as their systems were psychically scrambled. Ash stared in awe as the tide of the battle turned in seconds. He felt Sabrina's power, a vast, cool, and utterly dominant presence sweeping across the sky, dismantling the enemy with an elegance and precision he could never hope to match. With the last raptor taken down, a profound silence fell over the rooftop, broken only by the distant sounds of Misty's and Brock's battle on the streets. Ash finally allowed himself to collapse to one knee, the adrenaline leaving him weak. He recalled his battered Charizard and Sceptile, murmuring his thanks to them. Pikachu crawled into his lap, nuzzling him weakly. We did it, buddy, Ash whispered, stroking his fur. We held them. The victory was decisive. The Aegis ground forces were in disarray, their technology useless against a rampaging Gyarados and their primary objective a failure. The siege was broken. Jericho watched the tactical map, his forces' icons winking out one by one. His face was a mask of cold fury. His plan had been perfect. His technology was superior. But he had failed to account for one thing, the fierce, unbreakable bonds of loyalty. He had underestimated Ash Ketchum's friends. All units, he commanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Withdraw. Retreat to the fallback point. Operation Mute has failed. He looked at the image of the gym, standing defiant and whole. This wasn't over. It was a retreat, not a surrender. This defeat had only hardened his resolve. He had tried surgical precision. Next time, he would not be so restrained. As the last of the Aegis forces vanished from the city, an exhausted quiet settled over Saffron. Ash, supported by Sabrina, stood on the roof, looking down at the flooded, debris-strewn streets where Misty and Brock were already helping with the cleanup. The cost had been high. The city was damaged, its people terrified. But the sanctuary stood. They had faced the full might of the Aegis division and they had won. Sabrina leaned against him, a rare moment of physical contact born of shared exhaustion and victory. Your friends, she said, her voice full of wonder. Their family, Ash corrected, a proud smile on his face. He looked at her, at the formidable, brilliant woman who had commanded a fortress with her mind, and felt a surge of admiration so strong it almost buckled his knees. But as he looked out at the sky, now clear of drones and energy beams, he saw a faint, almost imperceptible darkening in the clouds to the west. A sickly, purplish tinge. He felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with Aegis. Sabrina felt it too. She stiffened, her hand gripping his arm. The psychic atmosphere, which should have been clear and calm after the battle, was suddenly thick with a miasma of fear, anger, and despair. It was the emotional residue of the siege, the chaos of the battle. And Malakar was feeding on it. A wave of pure, undiluted terror, far more powerful than the initial shockwave, washed over the entire city. It struck everyone, the celebrating trainers, the relieved civilians, the exhausted Pokémon. Even the disciplined Aegis soldiers, miles away in their retreat, felt it. They screamed, clutched their heads, their minds filled with paranoia and visions of their own defeat. The sky above Saffron City began to boil, the clouds swirling into a vortex of black and violent purple. Malakir, gorged on the conflict, was stirring in its prison, its influence spiking to a catastrophic level. The war Ash and Sabrina had just won had only served to awaken a far greater enemy. Chapter 6, A Truce of Vipers. The victory was ash in their mouths. The adrenaline of the battle evaporated, replaced by a cold, soul-deep dread that was infinitely worse than the threat of any laser cannon or combat drone. The psychic maelstrom that descended upon Saffron City was not an attack, it was a presence. A vast, suffocating blanket of pure terror that smothered the flicker of hope and triumph from the recent battle. On the rooftop, Ash instinctively threw his arms around Sabrina, his body shielding hers as if against a physical blow. He pushed his aura outwards, a desperate, defiant act of creating a small pocket of warmth and courage in the crushing, cosmic winter. It was like holding back the ocean with a bucket. He could feel the sheer, overwhelming scale of Malakir's consciousness, bloated and drunk on the negative energy of the siege. It wasn't just the fear of the civilians or the anger of the combatants, it was the pain of the wounded Pokémon, the frustration of the defeated soldiers, the despair of a city under attack. Every drop of negativity had become fuel. Sabrina pressed herself against him, her own psychic power, so dominant and precise just moments before, now a fragile shield struggling to keep from being shattered. It's feeding, she gasped, her voice thin and strained. The whole battle, we were just fattening the beast for the slaughter. Down on the streets, the scene was one of surreal horror. Misty's Gyarados, a moment ago a proud warrior, thrashed in the floodwaters, roaring not in anger but in primal fear, its mind assaulted by visions only it could see. Brock's mighty Steelix had coiled into a defensive ball, whimpering, a sound that should have been impossible for a creature of living metal. Civilians who had just begun to emerge from their homes screamed and fell to their knees, clutching their heads, their faces masks of unreasoning terror. This was not a battle. This was a plague of the soul. Far outside the city, the Aegis retreat had devolved into chaos. The disciplined convoy of vehicles swerved and crashed as their drivers were suddenly crippled by intense paranoia. Soldiers turned on one another, their faces pale with sweat, seeing enemies in the faces of their comrades. Their advanced technology, their rigid training, it was all utterly useless against an enemy that attacked from within. In his mobile command center, several miles away, alarms blared. Red lights flashed across screens displaying the biometric data of his troops. Catastrophic neural cascade detected. Multiple subject psychotic break imminent. Commander Jericho stood rigid, his hands gripping the edge of his tactical console so hard his knuckles were white. He felt it too. A cold, oily dread seeping into his own disciplined mind, whispering his deepest fears, the memory of the fire, the futility of his crusade, the faces of the people he couldn't save. He fought it back with sheer, iron-willed self-control, but it was like trying to hold his breath in a vacuum. He watched on his monitors as his perfect, disciplined army tore itself apart, consumed by a madness his science couldn't explain and his weapons couldn't fight. He looked at the main tactical screen, which still showed an energy overlay of Saffron City. At its center, where the gym stood, was a single, defiant point of golden light, a tiny, flickering candle in a hurricane of roiling purple darkness. Ash and Sabrina. They were resisting. They were the eye of the storm. His entire ideology, the bedrock of his life's purpose, cracked under the weight of that single image. His mission was to protect the world from the danger of Omega-level psychics. But here was a danger his worldview had no category for, a threat that made the power of a single psychic seem like a firecracker next to a supernova. And the very people he had designated as the ultimate threat were now the only ones standing against it. His hatred for them, his fear of their power, was a cold, hard thing. But the fear he felt now, watching the world descend into madness, was something far greater. It was the terror of extinction. He was a man of logic, of brutal pragmatism. And the logic was now unavoidable. He made a decision. It tasted like poison and surrender, but it was the only move left on the board. Communications, he barked, his voice raw. Open a secure, direct channel to target Alpha. Now. The analyst, his own face slick with sweat as he fought the encroaching dread, stared at him. Commander. To Sabrina. You. Heard me. Jericho roared, his own control fraying. Do it. On the gym roof, Ash was fighting a war on two fronts. He held the shield of his aura around them, a bastion of warmth and defiance against Malakir's oppressive fear, while simultaneously trying to calm Pikachu, who was shaking uncontrollably in his arms, his mind filled with psychic static. Sabrina was beside him, her eyes closed, her own power a thin, razor-sharp wall around the gym itself, a desperate attempt to keep the worst of the psychic fallout from the children hiding within. The strain was immense. Her nose was bleeding, a thin trickle of crimson against her pale skin. I can't hold it for much longer, Ash, she grunted, her teeth clenched. The pressure is too great. It's everywhere. Just then, a speaker on a nearby communications antenna crackled to life. It was a directed, short-range transmission, bypassing all other frequencies. Sabrina. Ash Ketchum. Do you read me? It was Jericho's voice. Cold, strained, but unmistakable. Ash's head snapped up, his face a mask of furious disbelief. You, he snarled. Isn't this what you wanted? Chaos? Fear? Now you can see what a real threat looks like. I see it, Jericho's voice came back, stripped of its earlier arrogance, replaced by a grim, desperate pragmatism. I also see that my forces are succumbing to it. My technology is useless. This entity is beyond the scope of my mission parameters. Your mission just about doomed us all. Ash shot back. Ash, wait, Sabrina interjected, her eyes still closed but her mind sharp. She could feel the change in Jericho. The rigid certainty was gone, replaced by a cold, hard knot of fear. Not for himself, but for his mission, for his world. He was a zealot whose god had just been proven false. What do you want, Jericho? She asked, her voice steady despite the strain. There was a pause, filled only by the low, psychic hum of the encroaching madness. A truce, Jericho said, the word sounding like it was being physically torn from his throat. A temporary alliance. My ideological imperative is the preservation of global stability. This entity is a greater threat to that stability than you are. Therefore, logically, it must be prioritized. Ash let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. A truce? You just tried to destroy our home and abduct our friends. You want us to trust you? I am not asking for your trust, Jericho's voice was cold as ice. I am proposing a transaction based on mutual interest. You possess the means to combat this entity on its own terms. I possess the logistical and military resources to manage the fallout. My forces, those that are still coherent, can establish a hard perimeter around Saffron. We can provide medical aid, contain the rampaging Pokémon, and manage the civilian population. That would free you to focus on the source of this attack without distraction. This is a practical division of labor. It was a Viper's offer, born of desperation, not a change of heart. He wasn't apologizing, he was delegating. He still saw them as weapons, but now he needed to aim them at a different target. The moral dilemma was a physical weight. To ally with the man who embodied everything they were fighting against. To accept the help of the monster who had created this mess in the first place. It was unthinkable. But then Ash looked down at the streets. He saw Misty struggling to calm her terrified Gyarados. He saw Brock trying to shield a group of crying children with his own body. He saw the city he had, in a way, adopted, succumbing to a plague of the mind. Pride was a luxury they couldn't afford. How many would suffer while they argued principles? He was a pragmatist when it came to saving lives. It was the core of his being. He had teamed up with Team Rocket more than once to face a greater threat. This was no different, even if it felt 1,000 times more repellent. He looked at Sabrina, a silent question in his eyes. He would not make this decision without her. She opened her eyes, the dark trickle of blood from her nose a stark reminder of the stakes. Her violet gaze was clear, cold, and calculating. She had reached the same grim conclusion. "We accept your truce, Commander," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "But on our terms. Not yours." There was another pause on the line. The shift in power dynamics was absolute. He had come to them. He needed them. "State them," Jericho said, his voice clipped. "Term 1, Sabrina began, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "Your Aegis division will operate under our command for the duration of this crisis. Your soldiers will follow our directives without question. You are a tool, Jericho. We will be the ones to wield you." Ash saw a muscle jump in Jericho's jaw on the small video feed that had flickered on. The demand was a calculated, deep insult to his pride. But he was trapped. Acceptable. For the duration of the crisis. Term 2, Ash cut in, his voice hard as steel. "When this is over, Aegis is to be disbanded. Your crusade ends today. You will turn over all your research, all your technology, all your personnel files to the Pokémon League, to be dealt with by an independent council. Which will include us." The silence stretched longer this time. This was not just a demand for a temporary ceasefire, it was a demand for unconditional surrender. "That is," Jericho began, but Ash cut him off. "That is the only way we don't let you and your army get consumed by this thing right now," Ash finished, his voice deadly serious. "It's your choice. Be remembered as the man who helped save the world, or be the footnote in the story of how it ended. The man whose pride got everyone killed." The psychic pressure from the locker seemed to intensify, as if it could sense the conflict, the hatred, the tension of the negotiation. Jericho looked away from the camera for a moment, at the chaos unfolding on his own monitors. His life's work was crumbling. His army was broken. His enemy was offering him the barest sliver of a chance to salvage something, anything, from the wreckage. He took a deep breath, the sound a ragged sigh of defeat. Term 2 is, accepted. Pending the successful resolution of the primary threat. He looked back at the camera, his gray eyes burning with a cold, controlled fire. "You have your truce. Now, tell me what you need." The alliance was forged. An ugly, necessary thing held together by desperation and mutual threats. "We need to find the heart of this storm," Sabrina said, taking charge. "The psychic disturbance is centered on the Kanto region, but it's too widespread to pinpoint from here. We need to get a global perspective." Ash's mind immediately went to the person who saw the world in data. "Gary," he said. "Gary Oak. His research team has access to the global Pokémon satellite network. If anyone can triangulate a psychic disturbance of this magnitude, it's him. Get me a secure line to his lab in Sinnoh," Sabrina commanded Jericho. "It's done," Jericho replied instantly, his fingers flying across his console. For all his faults, he was brutally efficient. Minutes later, Gary's face appeared on a holographic display that flickered to life in the air beside them. He looked frazzled, his lab coat askew. "Ash? What is going on? All our long-range sensors are going haywire. We're reading a massive, atmospheric energy phenomenon centered over Kanto, but it doesn't match any known weather pattern. It's registering on our psionic wave detectors like a Category 5 hurricane." "Gary, we need your help," Ash said, cutting to the chase. "It's a psychic entity. We need you to pinpoint the exact epicenter of the storm. The eye of the hurricane. A psychic entity." Gary paled, but his scientific mind immediately kicked into gear. Okay. Give me a moment." I can cross-reference the psionic wave intensity with gravimetric and atmospheric pressure anomalies. If I triangulate from 3 different satellite feeds, yes, I can do that. He turned away, barking orders at his own team of researchers. While they waited, the new, fragile alliance took its first steps. Jericho's voice, now broadcast to Ash and Sabrina's personal comms, was a constant stream of information. My remaining coherent units are mobilizing. We are establishing a quarantine perimeter 50 miles around Saffron. Medical teams are inbound. We are classifying this as a biopsychic contaminant event to avoid mass panic. It was bizarre, hearing his voice as an ally. But his efficiency was undeniable. Ash watched as small icons representing Aegis units began to form a neat, disciplined circle on a map Sabrina projected into the air between them. They were doing exactly what he'd said they would. Ash. Sabrina. I've got it. Gary's voice crackled, full of excitement and terror. The epicenter is, well, that's impossible. Gary, just tell us. Ash urged. It's Shamuti Island, Gary said, his voice full of disbelief. In the Orange Archipelago. According to all records, the island is volcanically active and uninhabited. But the energy readings there are off the charts. It's like the storm isn't just over the island, it's coming from it. Shamuti Island. The place of the legend of the Chosen One. The place where Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres had nearly torn the world apart. The place where Lugia had risen to restore the balance. A place of immense, elemental power. It made a terrifying kind of sense. The veil between worlds would be thin there. Jericho, Sabrina said, her voice sharp. We have our destination. We need transport to Shamuti Island. Stealth capability. We need to get through the psychic storm and past any corrupted Pokémon in the seas. Can you provide that? There was a moment of silence. I have one asset that can do it, Jericho replied, his voice grim. The Aegis. My flagship. A prototype stealth submersible. It has its own limited psionic dampening, which should protect the crew from the worst of the psychic fallout. It can get you to the island undetected. He paused. I will command the mission personally. Ash and Sabrina exchanged a look. To be trapped in a submarine at the bottom of the ocean with the man who had just tried to destroy them. The truce of vipers was about to get very, very close. Fine, Ash said, his voice flat. Tell us where and when. Rendezvous at the Vermilion City docks in 2 hours, Jericho commanded. We move now, or we are all consumed. Jericho out. The transmission ended. The holographic map faded. The sky above them continued to churn, a vortex of madness. Ash looked at Sabrina, her face streaked with dirt and dried blood, her eyes burning with fierce determination. He looked down at the city where his friends were now working alongside the very soldiers they had just been fighting. The world had been turned upside down. A submarine ride with Jericho, Ash said with a humorless smirk. What could possibly go wrong? Sabrina didn't smile. She simply reached out and took his hand, her grip firm and grounding. Whatever happens, she said, her voice a low, fierce promise, we face it together. Their resonance flared between them, a small, defiant star of hope against the encroaching darkness. Chapter 7, The Heart of the Maelstrom. The 2-hour journey to Vermilion City was a blur of calculated haste. The citywide psychic storm had not abated. If anything, the oppressive dread had settled into a low, grinding hum, a constant pressure on the mind that frayed nerves and shortened tempers. Jericho's truce, however ugly, was holding. Aegis forces, their grey uniforms a jarring sight, were working with a cold efficiency alongside League personnel, establishing triage centers and containment zones. The initial chaos had been corralled into a state of tense, martial order. Misty and Brock met them at the edge of the Saffron perimeter, their faces etched with worry. Misty's usual fiery energy was subdued, replaced by a grim exhaustion. Brock's steady calm was a welcome presence, but even he looked shaken. Shamuti Island? Misty said, her eyes wide with disbelief after they explained the plan. Ash, that place is a nexus of legendary power. The last time we were there, the world almost ended. And you're going back there with him? She jutted her chin towards the unseen, distant presence of Jericho. We don't have a choice, Mist, Ash said, his voice low and firm. He pulled his oldest friends into a tight, fierce hug. I need you two here. Hold the line. Keep people safe. You're the heart of this city's defense now. Brock clapped a firm hand on Ash's shoulder, his gaze serious. The legends of Shamuti speak of a chosen one who brings balance. Maybe the legend wasn't just about that one time. Be careful, Ash. Ancient power is not something to be trifled with. He then looked at Sabrina, his perceptive eyes noting the way she stood slightly closer to Ash, the easy way they shared space. He gave a small, knowing smile. And take care of each other. The farewell was brief, heavy with unspoken fears. As Ash and Sabrina departed in a black, unmarked Aegis vehicle, leaving their friends in charge, it felt like another profound shift. They were entrusting the world they were trying to save to the people they loved. The Vermilion Docks were a ghost town. The psychic miasma rolling off the sea was thick and cloying, a scent like ozone and despair that drove away all life. The water itself was dark and unnaturally still. Moored at a private, restricted pier was the Aegis. It was not a ship, but a submersible, and it was a masterpiece of brutalist, military design. Its hull was a sleek, matte black, angled in a way that suggested it was built to deflect more than just sonar. It radiated an aura of silent, predatory power. Jericho was waiting for them at the top of the boarding ramp. He was no longer in his dress uniform, but in a black, high-tech flight suit. His face was a stone mask, but Ash could feel the restless, coiled tension in him, the seething resentment at being forced into this position. Beside him stood a small, elite contingent of 4 Aegis soldiers, their faces hidden behind the polarized visors of their helmets. They were Jericho's personal guard, the best of the best, their loyalty absolute. Targets Alpha and Beta, Jericho greeted them, his voice devoid of any warmth, falling back on his operational designations. You're on time. Stow your Pokémon. We submerge in 5 minutes. The interior of the Aegis was as sterile and functional as its exterior. It was all gray metal, glowing tactical screens, and the low hum of advanced machinery. There were no comforts, no extraneous details. It was a weapon, through and through. Ash recalled Pikachu, murmuring a promise to let him out as soon as they were safe. The little Pokémon was still struggling with the psychic background noise, and the sub's internal dampening field would give him a chance to rest. Sabrina's alakazam teleported back to the saffron gem, where it could better serve as a psychic anchor for the defenders. They were alone with their enemy. The submersible disengaged from its moorings with a soft hiss and slipped beneath the dark waves. The world outside the reinforced viewport turned from gray to murky green, then to absolute black. On the bridge, a massive holographic map showed their projected course, a red line charting a path through the deep ocean trenches towards the Orange Archipelago. The tension on the bridge was a palpable thing. Ash and Sabrina stood on one side, a self-contained unit. Jericho and his soldiers stood at their stations on the other. They were allies, but the space between them crackled with animosity and distrust. Every command from Jericho was clipped and professional. Every response from his crew was immediate and disciplined. It was a glimpse into the perfect, well-oiled machine Ash and his friends had so thoroughly broken. We're approaching the outer edge of the psychic storm, a tech reported, her voice tight. Energy readings are spiking. Hull integrity is at 100%. Psionic dampening field is holding at 98% efficiency. Stay on course, Jericho commanded, his eyes fixed on the forward viewport, where there was nothing to see but darkness. Even with the dampening field, they could feel it. A low, vibrating pressure against the hull that wasn't physical. A subtle increase in the mental static. Ash felt a phantom itch at the back of his neck. Sabrina's jaw was tight, her senses on high alert. Suddenly, a proximity alert blared. Commander. Multiple biologicals, moving fast. On an intercept course. On the sonar screen, a swarm of red dots materialized, swarming towards them. "They're Pokémon," Sabrina said, her eyes distant as she tried to extend her senses past the dampening field. Tentacruel, Gyarados, Sharpedo, hundreds of them. They're mines, they're like the ones at the power plant. Corrupted. Glowing with that same purple energy. They see the sub as an intruder. Evasive maneuvers. Jericho snapped. Take us deeper. Go silent. The Aegis dove, its engines falling to a near-silent hum. But it was too late. A series of heavy, jarring thuds echoed through the hull as the first of the corrupted Pokémon slammed into them. The submersible shuddered violently. "They're attacking the ship," a soldier yelled. "Hull integrity at 91%, another reported. They're concentrating on the engine housing." Through the viewport, a horrifying sight appeared, illuminated by the sub's external lights. A massive tentacruel, its eyes burning with a malevolent purple fire, had wrapped its tentacles around the forward section of the sub, its huge beak trying to tear at the armored hull. A school of Sharpedo, their bodies glowing with the same sickly light, swarmed around it, slamming into the vessel like living torpedoes. "Arm photon torpedoes," Jericho ordered, his voice dangerously calm. "Target the largest contacts." "Commander, that's a direct violation of League protocols on engaging wild Pokémon," his weapons officer protested, his training warring with his orders. "Those are not wild Pokémon," Jericho countered, his voice like ice. "They are mindless weapons controlled by a hostile entity. And this is an act of war. Fire." Before the officer could comply, Sabrina stepped forward. "No," she commanded, her voice ringing with authority. "You will not fire on them. They are victims, not monsters." Jericho rounded on her, his face a mask of cold fury. "They are about to tear my ship apart. My priority is the completion of this mission. And you will fail it if you turn this ocean into a graveyard." Sabrina shot back, her own anger flaring. "Malakir feeds on this. The pain, the death, it's exactly what it wants. Do you want to arrive at Shamudi only to find you've supercharged your enemy?" They were at a standoff, their ideological war playing out in a metal tube at the bottom of the ocean. Ash stepped between them, his presence a solid, grounding force. "She's right, Jericho," he said, his eyes locking with the commander's. "We have to do this a different way. Your way is just pouring fuel on the fire." He turned to Sabrina. "Can you reach them? Calm them?" "Not all of them. Not with the dampening field up," she said, frustration clear in her voice. "And if we lower it, the crew, then we don't calm them," Ash said, a daring, reckless plan forming in his mind. "We distract them. Jericho, can your ship project a powerful, focused sonar pulse?" Jericho's eyes narrowed, processing the tactical implications. "It can. A wideband pulse would be disorienting to most marine life." "Good," Ash said. "Sabrina, when he does that, I need you to create a phantom. An illusion. Something big. Something that looks like a bigger threat, or a bigger meal. Can you do it?" Sabrina looked at Ash, at the wild, brilliant spark in his eyes. It was a crazy, improvised plan, just like his rockslide on the mountain. But she trusted it. She trusted him. "I can." "On my mark," Ash said, turning back to the stunned bridge crew. He was taking command. Not by force, but by the sheer, undeniable logic of a better plan. Jericho watched him for a long, tense moment, his authority completely usurped. A lesser man would have refused, would have let his pride condemn them. But Jericho was a pragmatist above all else. His way had failed. He would see if theirs could succeed. Do it, he ordered his crew. Follow his commands. On my mark, hit them with the sonar pulse, Ash instructed the tech. Sabrina, be ready. He closed his eyes, placing a hand on the cold metal wall of the sub. He wasn't trying to feel the Pokémon's minds. He was feeling the water. The pressure, the currents, the vibrations. He felt the frantic, chaotic energy of the swarm outside. Now, he yelled. The sub emitted a powerful, low-frequency boom that vibrated through their very bones. At the same instant, Sabrina's eyes flashed with violet light. She reached out with her mind, not to every corrupted Pokémon, but to a single point in the water a quarter mile ahead of the sub. There, she wove a masterpiece of illusion. She didn't just create an image. She created a presence. She took the vague, hungry thoughts of the corrupted swarm and gave them a target. She projected the psychic signature of a colossal, wounded Wylord, bleeding energy, a feast for their mindless rage. The illusion was so powerful, so alluring, that the corrupted Pokémon instantly forgot the submarine. Their primal instincts, twisted by Malakir's influence, took over. The swarm disengaged from the Aegis and shot off into the darkness, chasing the Phantom Feast. The bridge was silent, the crew staring at their sonar screens as the host of red dots sped away. The attack was over. Ash opened his eyes, letting out a breath. He looked at Sabrina, who was leaning against a console for support, the effort of creating such a powerful, distant illusion having cost her. A silent look of triumph and mutual respect passed between them. Jericho stared at Ash, his expression unreadable. Report, he barked to his crew. Hull integrity at 84%, the tech reported, her voice full of awe. Engines are undamaged. We are clear. The hostiles are no longer a threat. No one said another word. The rest of the journey to Shimudi was thick with a new kind of tension. It wasn't just animosity anymore. It was a grudging, infuriating respect. Ash and Sabrina had proven that their methods, their reliance on empathy and creative thinking, were not a weakness. They were a strategic asset. The Aegis surfaced in a hidden cove on the shores of Shimudi Island. When the hatch opened, the air that flooded in was not the clean, salt-scented air of the ocean. It was thick with dread, charged with a humming, malevolent energy. The sky was a bruised, perpetual twilight, the clouds swirling slowly around the island's central peak like water circling a drain. The island itself was twisted, its vegetation a dark, sickly green, its trees bent into unnatural shapes. It felt like a place that was fundamentally unwell. The team disembarked, Ash, Sabrina, Jericho, and his 4 elite soldiers. The soldiers immediately fanned out, securing the perimeter, their rifles held at the ready. The energy readings are highest at the peak, Jericho said, consulting a scanner on his wrist. At the site of the old shrine. The trek up the mountain was a grueling slog through a hostile landscape. Predatory, vine-like plants lashed out at them as they passed, and the ground itself seemed to pulse with a low, sickening vibration. The air was filled with whispers, psychic phantoms that flickered at the edge of their vision, illusions designed to sow fear and paranoia. Sabrina, with Ash's resonant energy to back her up, wove a protective psychic cocoon around their small group, filtering out the worst of the whispers. Even Jericho and his hardened soldiers were affected. Their movements were tense, their heads constantly snapping around to track phantom movements in the shadows. But they followed, their discipline holding against the mental assault. They found shelter for a brief rest in a shallow cave carved out of the mountainside. The wind howled outside, carrying the faint screams of corrupted Pokémon. Inside, the small space felt like the only sane place in the world. The Aegis soldiers stood guard at the entrance while Jericho reviewed his data, leaving Ash and Sabrina alone for a moment in the relative dark. "We're close," Sabrina whispered, her voice tired. "I can feel it. Like a giant, sleeping heart beating beneath the island." Ash looked at her, at the smudges of dirt on her face, the exhaustion in her eyes, the unwavering strength in her spirit. They had faced down a corrupt military, a sea of monsters, and a world descending into madness. And through it all, they had become an unbreakable unit. The resonance between them was no longer just a hum of power, it was a constant, comforting presence, a silent conversation that never stopped. "Sabrina," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "When we were in the dragon's den, the elder called you the savant and me the anchor. She was right. You're the mind, the strategist. You see the path. But he trailed off, trying to find the words. My power, my feelings, they're a storm. You give them focus. You give me focus. I've won battles my whole life, but I've always felt, apart from everyone. Even my friends. They don't understand this part of me." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "You do. With you, I'm not just an anchor. I'm whole." Her breath hitched. His words. His raw, honest confession, struck a deeper chord in her than any psychic probe ever could. He saw her not as a weapon or a tool or even a sanctuary, but as his counterpart. His completion. "Ash," she whispered, her own voice thick with an emotion she rarely allowed herself to feel. "Before you, my mind was a fortress built to keep the world out. A silent, perfect, lonely prison. Your presence, it didn't break down the walls. It just walked right through the front door and made it a home." The space between them vanished. The world, the storm, Jericho, Malakar, it all faded away, leaving only the two of them in the quiet dark of the cave. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his thumb stroking away a smudge of dirt. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. It was in this moment, with the world falling apart around them, in a place of profound darkness and fear, that he knew. This wasn't just a partnership. It wasn't just an alliance or a resonance. It was everything. "When this is over," he said, his voice a low, steady promise in the howling wind. "Marry me, Sabrina." It wasn't a question born of romance novels or fairy tales. It was a declaration. A statement of fact. In a world of chaos, it was the one, single thing he was absolutely certain of. It was a promise to be her anchor, not just in battle, but for all time. Sabrina's eyes opened, her violet irises shimmering with unshed tears. She didn't need to weigh variables or calculate outcomes. Her mind, which could process a million thoughts in a second, was utterly, blissfully silent, filled with only one, resounding truth. She surged forward, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was both a desperate claiming and a gentle surrender. It was not a kiss of passion, but of profound, soul-deep recognition. It was the sealing of a bond forged in battle, tempered in fear, and now realized in love. The resonance between them exploded, a silent, golden nova of pure, unadulterated joy that, for a single, brilliant instant, pushed back the darkness of the entire island. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his, their breath mingling in the cold air. "Yes," she whispered, the single word a vow, an acceptance, and a promise all in one. Their marriage wouldn't be for a future of peace and quiet. It was a weapon they would wield, here and now. The perfect, unbreakable union of the anchor and the savant. And together, they would face the dawn. Chapter 8, the God Machine. The golden nova of their connection, the silent, explosive declaration of their love, was a flare of hope in the oppressive gloom of Shamudi Island. For a single, breathtaking moment, the whispers in the wind ceased, the sickening pulse of the island faltered, and the very air seemed to hold its breath. It was a testament to the power they now wielded not as two individuals, but as a unified whole. At the mouth of the cave, Jericho stiffened, his head snapping up from his data slate. The scanner on his wrist shrieked, a high-pitched wail of protest. He stared at the display, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and avaricious hunger. The energy spike that had just occurred, a perfect, harmonic resonance, was beyond anything his models had predicted. It was power on a scale that dwarfed legendary Pokémon. It was the power to rewrite the world. His world. He quickly silenced the alarm, his face settling back into a cold, calculating mask. But inside, his mind was reeling. His original plan, to capture Ash and Sabrina and use their power as a battery, now seemed laughably small, like trying to catch a tsunami in a teacup. This was something else entirely. This was a power that could not be contained. It could only be hijacked. Ash and Sabrina pulled apart, the world slowly rushing back in. The moment of peace was over, the howling dread of the island returning, but something fundamental had changed. The space between them was no longer just a resonance of power, it was a covenant. They looked at each other, a silent promise. Passing between them, before turning their attention back to the harsh reality of their mission. "Let's finish this," Ash said, his voice imbued with a new, unshakable confidence. He took her hand, their fingers lacing together naturally, a simple gesture that was now a symbol of their united front. They emerged from the cave, rejoining Jericho and his silent, helmeted guards. If Jericho noticed the change in their demeanor, the new and profound strength of their bond, he gave no sign. His gray eyes were fixed on the path ahead, on the misty, ominous peak that loomed above them. "The energy readings are fluctuating wildly now," he stated, his voice clipped and professional. "Whatever is at the summit is reacting to our presence. To your presence." The final ascent was the most treacherous. The illusions grew more potent, more personal. Ash saw fleeting images of his mother, her face racked with worry, begging him to come home. Sabrina was assaulted by visions of her young students, their faces pale with fear, accusing her of abandoning them. They were insidious, tailored attacks designed to exploit their deepest attachments and create doubt. But their new, unified bond was a shield more powerful than any psionic field. Ash anchored Sabrina in the present, his unwavering love a bulwark against the phantoms of her responsibility. Sabrina, in turn, kept his mind clear, her precise telepathy cutting through the emotional fog of the illusions, showing them for the pathetic tricks they were. They walked through the psychic minefield hand in hand, untouchable. Jericho and his men were not so fortunate. Without the full protection of their shared aura, they were more vulnerable. Ash saw one of the soldiers stumble, his rifle wavering as he stared at an empty patch of ground, his body language screaming that he was seeing something horrific. "Focus." Jericho's voice was a whipcrack. "They are not real. Your discipline is your only weapon here. Move." His harsh command seemed to work. The soldier shook his head and fell back into formation, but the incident was a stark reminder of the poisonous environment they were wading through. They finally broke through the last line of twisted trees and stepped into the clearing at the summit. The sight that greeted them stole their breath. It was not the simple, rustic shrine Ash remembered. The old stone plinths were still there, but they were now integrated into something far larger, far more terrifying. The heart of the clearing was dominated by a colossal, techno-arcane machine. It was a sprawling apparatus of black, unknown metal, crystalline conduits, and pulsating rings of energy, all humming with a discordant, menacing power. It looked like a fusion of ancient magic and futuristic technology, a bizarre hybrid of a temple and a particle accelerator. And at its very center, where the three legendary treasures were supposed to be placed, was a vortex of swirling, chaotic purple energy, the primary rupture in Malakir's prison. But that was not the most horrifying part. Chained to the machine at three equidistant points were the legendary titans, Regirock, Regice, and Registeel. They were held fast by crackling energy shackles, their bodies dim, their usual light patterns flickering weakly. Veins of the same sickly purple corruption that had infected the Pokémon at the power plant snaked across their ancient bodies. They were not guardians, they were prisoners. Batteries. Their immense life force was being siphoned, drained away to power this monstrous machine. "What is this?" Ash breathed, his voice a mixture of awe and disgust. "This isn't a shrine. It's a prison." "It's more than that," Sabrina said, her voice a horrified whisper. Her psychic senses were reeling from the sheer complexity of the machine. It's a regulator. A control system. This entire machine, it was built to manage the prison. To channel and suppress Malakar's energy. Jericho stepped forward, a strange, feverish light in his eyes as he gazed upon the god machine. Magnificent, isn't it? He said, his voice soft with reverence. The ancients weren't just mystics. They were engineers. They didn't just lock their monster in a cage. They built a system to control it. Ash and Sabrina turned to him, a cold, dawning suspicion taking root. Jericho's fascination was too intense, too proprietary. You knew about this, Ash stated, his voice dangerously low. This was never just a mission to stop Malakar. Jericho finally dropped the pretense. He turned to them, and for the first time, he smiled. It was not a pleasant sight. It was a smile of triumph, of a plan centuries in the making finally coming to fruition. Stop Malakar, he chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Why would I want to destroy a tool of such unimaginable power? My family's research, the true purpose of the Aegis division, was never just about containing psychic threats. It was about finding this place. The ultimate solution. The God Machine. The 4 Aegis soldiers who had been standing guard moved with silent, synchronized precision. They raised their rifles, not at the corrupted landscape, but at Ash and Sabrina. The trap had been sprung. My ancestor was on the council that sanctioned the building of this machine, Jericho explained, his voice ringing with the passion of a zealot revealing his gospel. He argued that simply imprisoning Malakar was a waste. He believed it could be harnessed. Controlled. Its power to influence minds, to enforce order, it could be the ultimate deterrent. The key to a forced, perfect, global peace. The council, in their cowardice, chose containment over control. My family has spent generations waiting to correct that mistake. His insane, hubristic ambition was laid bare. He didn't want to destroy the psychic god of chaos. He wanted to hijack it. He wanted to put a leash on the hurricane and wield it as the ultimate weapon of order. You're insane, Sabrina breathed, her mind reeling at the sheer arrogance of his plan. You can't control a being of pure chaos. It will consume you. It will consume everything. That's where you are mistaken, Jericho countered, gesturing to them. The ancients lacked the final component. A focusing lens. A psychic amplifier powerful enough to interface with the machine and impose a singular will upon the entity. They didn't have a perfect, harmonic resonance. They didn't have you. His true plan slammed into them with the force of a physical blow. He hadn't just led them here to fight Malakar. He had lured them here to be the final key. He planned to strap them into this monstrous machine, to use their perfect, loving resonance as the conduit through which he would seize control of a god. You won't get away with this, Jericho. Ash snarled, his body tensing, his aura flaring to life. Pikachu, released from his pokeball the moment they arrived, leaped onto his shoulder, his cheeks sparking with rage. Jericho laughed. I already have. Did you really think I would bring you to the heart of my operation without a contingency? He snapped his fingers. From behind the humming conduits of the machine, more Aegis soldiers emerged, a dozen of them, armed with heavy-duty psionic suppressors. But they weren't alone. With them was a Pokemon Ash recognized with a jolt of shock. A sleek, powerful Metagross, its metallic body gleaming. But its eyes glowed with the same cold, analytical light as Jericho's. It was his Pokemon. A psychic type of immense intelligence and power, completely loyal to its master's fanatical cause. Metagross is one of the most intelligent Pokemon in existence, Jericho said calmly. Its psychic mind is a fortress, insusceptible to your tricks. And it is more than a match for your Pokemon. You are surrounded. Your powers, while impressive, cannot overcome superior tactics and overwhelming force. The tactical situation was dire. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing a psychic Pokemon whose raw power might rival their own. But Jericho had made one critical miscalculation. He saw their power. He saw their resonance. He had even witnessed their bond. But he could not, understand its nature. He saw it as a tool, a synergy of abilities. He didn't see it as love. He didn't understand that their strength wasn't just the sum of their powers, but the depth of their commitment to each other. "You're right about one thing, Jericho," Ash said, his voice quiet, but carrying a deadly certainty. He squeezed Sabrina's hand, a silent message passing between them. "Together. You can't overcome us." The battle erupted. The Aegis soldiers opened fire, beams of suppressing energy converging on them. But Ash and Sabrina moved as one. Ash threw up a kinetic wall, not a static shield, but a swirling, dynamic vortex of force that caught the beams and sent them careening harmlessly into the sky. Behind this cover, Sabrina acted. She didn't attack the soldiers. She attacked their technology. With a flick of her wrist, she sent a targeted telekinetic pulse at the soldiers' helmets, shattering their polarized visors and frying the delicate electronics of their comms units. They were deaf and blind, cut off from Jericho's commands. Jericho's Metagross was the true threat. It charged forward, its immense psychic power manifesting as a tangible wave of pressure. Metagross, psychic on the machine's control interface. "Initiate the convergence protocol," Jericho commanded. He wasn't trying to defeat them in a battle, he was trying to activate the machine while they were distracted. "Pikachu, you handle the soldiers. We'll take the big guy," Ash yelled. Pikachu became a yellow thunderbolt, weaving through the chaos. He wasn't using brute force. He was a strategic weapon, hitting the soldiers' rifles with precise iron tails, disabling their equipment, using quick attack to create diversions. Ash and Sabrina faced Metagross together. The massive Pokemon fired a shadow ball, a condensed sphere of ghostly energy. Ash met it head-on, catching the sphere in a raw telekinetic grip. He grunted with the effort, the dark energy struggling against his hold. Beside him, Sabrina's eyes glowed. She reached out with her mind and unwove the very fabric of the attack, causing the shadow ball in Ash's hands to dissipate into harmless wisps of smoke. It was their resonance in action. His raw power, her fine control. Force and finesse, perfectly synchronized. "Incredible," Jericho breathed, watching the display with a hungry gleam. This only confirmed how essential they were to his plan. Metagross, shift to close combat. Meteor mash. Metagross's body glowed with cosmic energy as it charged, its powerful arms ready to deliver a devastating blow. Ash met the charge head-on. He didn't try to block the massive Pokemon. He slid under its attack, his hand glowing, and slapped a palm against its metal leg. He didn't push it. He vibrated it, sending a disruptive kinetic pulse through its body, momentarily jarring its internal mechanics. The meteor mash missed by inches, crashing into the ground and shattering the rock. As Metagross stumbled, its balance thrown off by the pulse, Sabrina struck. An invisible spear of telekinetic force slammed into the joint of its primary leg, forcing the limb to buckle. The psychic titan crashed to the ground with a grating screech of metal. They weren't just fighting it. They were dismantling it. But Jericho's resolve was absolute. While his Metagross kept them occupied, he had made his way to a control pedestal on the God Machine. His fingers flew across an interface of glowing runes. "It's too late," he shouted over the din of battle. "The convergence has begun. Your power will be mine." The machine roared to life. The energy siphoned from the legendary titans intensified, pouring into the central vortex. The entire summit began to tremble as the fabric of reality groaned under the strain. The swirling purple rupture began to expand, its chaotic energy spilling out, no longer contained. It was in that moment that Jericho's ideology began to betray him. He saw Ash and Sabrina, fighting not with rage or fear, but with a perfect, harmonious synergy. He saw them protecting each other, anticipating each other's moves, their bond a thing of beauty even in the midst of battle. He saw true heroism, a power born of love and trust. And he saw himself, a man standing at a console, trying to enslave a god, his only companion a machine and his own burning ambition. The moral lines he had drawn with such certainty began to blur. For the first time in his life, a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, pierced his fanaticism. As he stood there, momentarily paralyzed by this unwelcome epiphany, a data burst, routed through the Aegis network from half a world away, flashed on his wrist slate. It was from Gary Oak's lab. Warning, incipient energy cascade detected. Malakar entity is not being contained. It is metabolizing the machine's power. It is using the machine to create a physical anchor. You are not controlling it. You are giving it a body. The word struck Jericho with the force of a physical blow. The blood drained from his face. The foundation of his entire life's work, his family's legacy, crumbled into dust. He wasn't a conqueror. He was a fool. A dupe. He had been so obsessed with his own power that he had become the willing instrument of the very chaos he sought to control. The realization came too late. With a final, deafening roar, the god machine overloaded. The purple vortex at its center did not close. It exploded outwards. Malakar was free. Chapter 9, The Unveiling of Malakar. The explosion from the god machine was not one of fire and shrapnel. It was an eruption of pure, silent consciousness. A wave of tangible psychic energy, thick and suffocating as mud, washed over the summit of Shimudi Island. The humming, whirring sounds of the colossal machine died, replaced by a single, pervasive, mind-shattering note that existed only in the theater of the soul. Malakar did not emerge. It unveiled. The swirling purple vortex did not vanish, it bled outwards, staining the very air, the rock, the sky. The world lost its color and texture, resolving into a monochrome landscape of gray dread and violet despair. The entity was not a monster that had escaped its cage. The cage itself had dissolved, and its prisoner was now the very environment they stood in. Malakar was everywhere. Ash and Sabrina were thrown back by the psychic shockwave, their combined powers the only thing that kept their minds from being instantly shredded. The Aegis soldiers were not so lucky. They screamed, a chorus of raw, animal terror, as their helmets offered no protection. They dropped their rifles, clawing at their own faces, their minds flooded, broken, and consumed. They fell to the ground, their bodies still, but their eyes wide with a permanent, catatonic horror. Jericho's Metagross, a being of immense psychic strength, shuddered violently and then went still, its inner light extinguished, leaving only a hollow metal shell. Only Jericho himself, standing at the epicenter of his failure, remained conscious, protected by some lingering field from the control pedestal. He stared, his face a canvas of utter devastation, as the legacy of his family, the culmination of his life's work, became the harbinger of the apocalypse. Malakar didn't need to attack them physically. It was a plague of the mind, and it went to work with the patient, insidious precision of a master torturer. It didn't show them illusions, it weaponized their own truths, twisting their deepest selves against them. It found Brock, miles away in Saffron City, organizing relief efforts. Suddenly, his mind was flooded with an unshakable, crippling certainty. His research was meaningless, his knowledge a pathetic collection of trivia in the face of cosmic oblivion. He saw visions of every Pokemon he'd ever failed to heal, every person he'd ever failed to help. His steady, reliable spirit crumbled under a mountain of perceived failure, and he sank to his knees, paralyzed by despair. It found Misty, her Gyarados finally calmed, directing water flows to put out fires. The entity whispered in her ear, showing her visions of her sisters in Cerulean City, laughing, calling her the weakest, the one who ran away, the one who was never good enough. It preyed on the insecurity she had fought her entire life to overcome. Her fiery determination was quenched by a tidal wave of self-doubt, and her strength left her. It found Gary Oak in his Sinnoh lab, his mind racing to comprehend the data. Malakir showed him a future where every discovery he ever made led to a new and more terrible weapon, where his pursuit of knowledge only ever accelerated the world's destruction. His intellectual curiosity, his greatest gift, became a curse, and he froze, unable to act, terrified of the consequences of his own genius. On the summit, it turned its full, terrifying attention to the three conscious beings remaining. It delved into Jericho's mind, not with visions, but with a single, brutal truth. It forced him to relive the moment his home was vaporized, but this time, it showed him that the aspiring psychics had been influenced by its own subtle whispers, a test of its weakening prison. His entire life's crusade, his burning, righteous purpose, had not been a response to a random tragedy. It had been the result of Malakir's first, patient move on the cosmic chessboard. His vengeance was not his own. It was a script, and he had played his part to perfection. Jericho let out a choked, broken sound, the last vestiges of his pride and certainty shattering into dust. Then, it turned to Sabrina. It did not attack her. It offered her a gift. "You seek to protect them," a voice whispered, not in her ears, but in the core of her being. The voice was ancient, calm, and possessed of an infinite, terrible wisdom. "But they are so fragile. Their emotions are a storm that will always threaten to drown them. Their thoughts are a chaotic cacophony. Why chain yourself to their weakness?" The gray, dead world of the summit dissolved. Sabrina found herself floating in a silent, endless cosmos of pure thought. It was a library containing every idea ever conceived and every possibility yet to be imagined. The secrets of creation, the mathematics of the universe, the thoughts of every being on every star, it was all here, a silent, perfect, orderly sea of knowledge. "Join us," the voice of Malakir offered. "Cast off the flawed, emotional shell of your body. Abandon the messy, painful anchor of your attachments. Here, there is no pain. No fear. No loneliness. Only the quiet, eternal perfection of pure consciousness. It is everything you have ever truly wanted." For a terrifying, eternal second, she was tempted. The offer was a siren song to the deepest, most hidden part of her soul, the little girl who had been so overwhelmed by the noise of the world, who had craved only silence and order. Her eyes, fixed on Ash, glazed over. The fierce, protective fire in them dimmed. The universe of thought was so beautiful, so perfect. Ash felt the shift in their resonance. The warm, steady connection wavered, growing cold and distant. He felt her slipping away from him, not into death, but into a vast, silent emptiness. Terror, sharp and cold, lanced through him. "Sabrina," he yelled, his voice sounding small and weak in the oppressive psychic silence. He grabbed her hand, his grip desperate. He couldn't fight Malakir with logic. He couldn't outwit a cosmic intelligence. He could only be what he had always been, an anchor. He closed his eyes and poured his entire being into their bond. He didn't send memories. He sent the raw, untamed, messy feeling of them. He sent the burning sting of a scraped knee from his childhood, the simple, perfect joy of sharing a sandwich with Pikachu, the bone-deep ache of exhaustion after a hard-won battle, the fierce, irrational pride of seeing his Pidgeot evolve. He sent her the chaotic, imperfect, glorious feeling of being alive. And then, he sent her the one thing that was his and his alone, the one feeling in the universe that Malakir could not comprehend, could not corrupt, could not offer. He sent her his love. Not as a concept, but as a sensation. He sent her the feeling of his heart pounding in his chest when he looked at her, the warmth that spread through him when she smiled, the absolute, unshakable certainty he felt when he asked her to be his wife, the feeling of her kiss in the cave. He flooded their connection with the noisy, chaotic, irrational, and utterly perfect storm of his love for her. In the silent sea of knowledge, Sabrina felt it. A single, warm, vibrant, and defiantly alive current in the cold, dead ocean of thought. It was a lighthouse in the fog. An anchor in the void. It was Ash. The illusion of the cosmos shattered. She gasped, her eyes flying open, the fire returning to them, brighter and more intense than ever. She was back. She was gripping his hand so tightly her knuckles were white. Ash, she breathed, his name a prayer. Malaka recoiled, its silent whisper turning into a shriek of fury and disbelief. It could not comprehend. This human emotion, this love, was an illogical, chaotic variable that defied its every calculation. Its attempt at seduction had failed. Now, all that was left was annihilation. The gray, formless mist of the summit began to coalesce. The psychic energy, diffuse and omnipresent, began to pour into a single point, drawn from the dead Aegis soldiers, the disabled Metagross, and the very rock of the island. It was taking the data it had received from Gary's warning, the concept of a physical anchor, and it was building itself a body. A form. Tendrils of solid, black-purple. Energy writhed and twisted, forming limbs, a torso, a head. It grew with terrifying speed, a god of chaos weaving itself a body from despair and stolen life force. Within seconds, a colossal figure, 20 feet tall, stood before them. It had no face, only a smooth, featureless head, but it radiated an aura of absolute power and unending hatred that was 1,000 times more terrifying than its formless state. It was no longer a plague. It was a warrior. And it was unstoppable. It raised a massive, clawed hand, preparing to wipe the two defiant sparks of life from existence. It was in that moment that Jericho moved. His face was a wreck of tear-streaked devastation, his mind shattered by the revelation of his own folly. But in his eyes, a single, final ember of his old self remained, the soldier. The man of action. He had been a fool, a pawn, a villain. But he would not die a coward. I chose the wrong way, he whispered, the words a confession to himself and to the world. He looked at Ash and Sabrina, at the unbreakable bond between them, at the defiance in their eyes. He saw the world's last, true hope. And he knew, with the last shred of his pragmatic mind, what he had to do. His life was forfeit. His legacy was a joke. But he could still buy them a chance. One chance. While Malakar's new form was still stabilizing, its attention focused on Ash and Sabrina, Jericho threw himself at the control pedestal of the God Machine. His hands flew across the rune-covered interface, his lifetime of research, his intimate knowledge of this machine, now used not for conquest, but for sacrifice. Gary's data burst, a destabilizing frequency, he muttered, his fingers inputting a complex series of commands. There's a failsafe, an energy purge. If I can just reroute the remaining power from the Titans, Malakar sensed his action. Its faceless head turned towards him, and it let out another silent, psychic shriek of rage. It knew what he was trying to do. You will not deny me my victory. Jericho screamed, his voice raw with grief and newfound purpose. He slammed his palm down on the final, glowing rune. I was a shield. I will be a shield. Aegis. The God Machine, which had gone dark, roared back to life for one, final, catastrophic second. The last dregs of life force from the three legendary Titans, combined with the machine's own self-destruct sequence, were not released as a chaotic explosion. Instead, they were focused, refined, and converted into a single, massive pulse of pure, white energy. An energy pulse tuned to the precise, destabilizing harmonic frequency Gary Oak had discovered. The pulse erupted from the machine, not in a wave, but in a focused beam aimed directly at Jericho. He stood and took the full force of it, his body acting as the final conduit. The energy surged through him, and with a final, defiant roar, it erupted from his chest, a blinding lance of white light that struck the newly formed Malakar dead center. Jericho's body was instantly vaporized, leaving nothing behind but the echo of his final shout. He was gone. The effect on Malakar was not what anyone expected. The white light did not destroy it. It did not even seem to harm it. Instead, the destabilizing frequency did exactly what its name implied. It broke the cohesion of Malakar's being. The entity's physical form, which had been woven from pure psychic energy, began to unravel, but it did not dissipate. Instead, the energy, unable to remain in its intangible, psychic state, was forced to become tangible. Corporeal. The god of the mind, the formless rage, was trapped, for a fleeting moment, in a body of solid, vulnerable matter. Malakir let out a true, audible roar of agony and rage, a sound that tore through the silent summit. The invulnerable psychic god had been wounded, made mortal. Its invincibility was gone. Jericho's sacrifice, his final act of atonement, had not won the war. But it had given Ash and Sabrina the one thing they didn't have. A target. Chapter 10, The Resonance of Two. The sound of Malakir's pain was in the fabric of reality. For the first time, the entity was not a whisper or a presence, but a physical being, roaring in agony. Its colossal, featureless form flickered and solidified, the psychic energy that composed it now bound by the laws of matter, made vulnerable by Jericho's final, desperate act. The white light of the failsafe faded, leaving the summit of Shamuti Island bathed in the sickly, swirling twilight of the psychic storm, now centered on the enraged, corporeal god. Ash and Sabrina stood side by side, the wind from Malakir's roar whipping at their clothes. They were exhausted, battered, and heartsick from the cascade of psychic trauma they had just endured. But for the first time since they set foot on this cursed island, they felt a flicker of something other than dread. They felt a chance. "It's solid," Ash said, his voice low and intense, his eyes locked on the towering figure of Malakir. He could feel it now, not just as a psychic pressure, but as a physical thing, its immense weight, the anger vibrating through its new body, the raw, furious power coiling within it. He made it solid. "For how long, we don't know," Sabrina replied, her mind racing, processing the new tactical reality. "The frequency is unstable. It will regain its intangible form. This is our only window." A physical battle was hopeless. Even in this state, Malakir radiated power on a scale that would make a legendary Pokémon seem like a child's pet. A hyper beam from Charizard would be a pinprick. A volt tackle from Pikachu would be an irrelevance. Its body may have been made of matter, but it was matter held together by a god's will. They could not break it. They looked at each other. No words were needed. The path forward was terrifying, uncertain, and something no one in history had ever attempted. But it was the only path they had. Their sparring session, their battle at the power plant, their journey here, it had all been training for this single moment. This was the culmination. This was the reason for their resonance. "The anchor and the savant," Ash murmured, a fierce, determined smile touching his lips. He held out his hand. Sabrina took it without hesitation, her cool fingers lacing with his. Their grip was not just a gesture of affection, it was the closing of a circuit. "The resonance of two," she answered, her voice ringing with a newfound, absolute conviction. They stood at the epicenter of the psychic storm, a maelstrom of fear and despair, and they became its eye. The quiet, calm center of it all. Malakir, its rage-focused, raised a colossal, clawed hand to crush the two insignificant mortals who had caused it such pain. The hand, blotting out the swirling sky, descended upon them. They didn't flinch. They didn't run. They didn't raise a shield. They joined. Ash closed his eyes, and with an act of supreme trust, he let go. He opened the floodgates of his very being, surrendering the entirety of his raw, chaotic, kinetic aura, not as an attack, but as an offering. It was a river of untamed, golden energy, a torrent of pure, empathic power, and he channeled all of it, without reservation, into Sabrina. Sabrina, in turn, opened her mind completely. She dropped the last of her mental walls, her psychic shields, the fortresses she had spent a lifetime building. She accepted the deluge of his power, not with fear, but with perfect, welcoming grace. Her mind, a vast and intricate crystal lattice of precise, telepathic control, became the vessel for his untamed ocean of energy. It was a perfect union. His heart and her mind. His power and her precision. His empathy and her intellect. The golden light of his aura merged with the violet glow of her psionic energy, creating an incandescent, swirling sphere of white gold light that enveloped them completely. As Malakar's hand descended, this sphere of light did not brace for impact. It expanded. It met the descending blow not with resistance, but with an embrace. They did not attack Malakar. They did not try to overpower it. They healed it. They channeled their perfect, loving resonance, the ultimate expression of balance and connection, directly into the chaotic, hateful, and lonely consciousness of the ancient entity. It was not a psychic assault, it was an act of cosmic empathy. The moment their combined consciousness touched Malakar's, the entity recoiled in shock. It had expected a blow, a psychic counterattack. It was not prepared for this. It was not prepared for them. They showed it the concept of a shared bond, something it had never known. It had only ever been a singular consciousness of coalesced negativity. They showed it the memory of a young boy sharing his lunch with a stray Pokemon. They showed it the fierce loyalty of a mother protecting her child. They showed it the quiet, steadfast companionship of two old friends sitting in comfortable silence. They showed it the image of Jericho, a man consumed by hatred, sacrificing himself for the very people he despised, a final, defiant act of love for a world he had almost destroyed. They showed it their own love. They poured the feeling of their first meeting, their sparring session, their hands joined in the dragon's den, their kiss in the cave, into the very heart of the entity. They showed it the beauty and strength of two souls becoming one, not through consumption, but through connection. Malakar was a being of pure, unbalanced negativity. They were a force of perfect, harmonious balance. They were its philosophical and spiritual antithesis. They were the cure to its sickness. The violent, churning purple energy of Malakar's form began to soften. The sharp, hateful edges of its consciousness began to smooth. The roaring rage was slowly, inexorably soothed, tempered by the warm, brilliant glow of their combined power. The storm above Shamudi Island began to calm. The thick, dark clouds began to part, and for the first time, a single, pure ray of sunlight pierced the gloom, striking the spot where Ash and Sabrina stood. The entity's colossal, physical form began to dissolve, not with a shriek of pain, but with a long, slow sigh of release. It was the sigh of a being that had been in pain for millennia, a being born of fear and rage that had never known anything else. The black-purple matter of its body broke down, not into dust, but into millions of tiny, benign motes of psychic light, like fireflies in the dawn. Malakar was not destroyed. It was unmade. It was dismantled, its chaotic energy broken down and rendered inert, its singular, hateful consciousness dissolved back into the fundamental, neutral emotional spectrum of the world. The storm was over. The silent tempest was, at last, silent. The motes of light drifted on the wind, scattering across the globe, seeding the world not with chaos, but with a gentle, neutral potential. On the summit, the sphere of white gold light around Ash and Sabrina slowly faded. They stood, still holding hands, in the first true sunlight the island had seen in days. They were pale, trembling with exhaustion, their energy utterly spent. But they were standing. They were whole. Ash stumbled, his knees finally buckling. Sabrina, using the last of her strength, eased him to the ground, collapsing beside him. They lay on the broken rock of the summit, their heads pillowed on the ruins of the god machine, their hands still clasped between them. The world was quiet. The oppressive psychic pressure was gone. The only sounds were the gentle sea breeze and their own ragged breaths. Did we? Ash began, his voice a hoarse whisper. We did, Sabrina finished for him, a tired, radiant smile gracing her lips. She turned her head to look at him. His face was smudged with grime and sweat, but to her, he had never looked more beautiful. We did. They lay there for a long time, simply breathing, feeling the warmth of the sun, anchored to the solid, living world, and to each other. Epilogue, 1 year later the sunlight streaming through the crystal dome of the new building was warm and bright. The sound was not of silence, nor of fear, but of laughter. The gentle hum of controlled power. The murmur of teachers and students. The new Saffron Institute was more beautiful than the building it had replaced. Built on the foundations of the old gym, it was a marvel of open spaces, lush gardens, and sweeping architecture. It was part university, part monastery, part sanctuary. On the front wall of the grand atrium, a simple, elegant plaque of black stone was inscribed with a single name, Commander Jericho. A memorial to the man whose flawed crusade and ultimate sacrifice had made this new world possible. The existence of powerful psychics was no longer a secret to be whispered or a threat to be contained. Malakar's unveiling had changed everything. The world had seen the abyss, and it had seen who had stood at the edge to push it back. Fear had been replaced by a grudging, awestruck respect. The remnants of the Aegis division, leaderless and humbled, had been absorbed into a new branch of the Pokémon League, one dedicated not to containment, but to cooperation and understanding. Their technology was now used to help young, uncontrolled psychics stabilize their powers. Ash and Sabrina stood on a balcony overlooking the main training hall. Below, a new generation of psychics, empaths, telekinetics, clairvoyants, practiced their abilities under the watchful eyes of experienced instructors. They were learning to build, not to hide. Ash was not the same man he was a year ago. He still had the heart of a Pokémon trainer, the restless energy of an adventurer. But there was a new depth to him, a quiet, confident stillness. He was a teacher now, a mentor, the anchor not just for one, but for many. He stood with his hands on the railing, watching a young boy struggle to levitate a block. Ash smiled, and sent a tiny, imperceptible pulse of encouragement, a psychic nudge of, "You can do it." The block wobbled, and then rose steadily into the air. The boy's face lit up with astonished joy. Sabrina came to stand beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. Her presence was a constant, comforting warmth at the edge of his mind. She was no longer the cold, distant savant, but a leader, a headmistress, her vast intellect and power now dedicated to nurturing and protecting her students. "You're getting good at that," she said, a teasing lilt in her voice. "I have a good teacher," he replied, turning to smile at her. They were married now. The ceremony had been small, private, held in the quiet serenity of Professor Oak's garden. Their friends, their family, had been there. Misty and Brock, who now served as visiting professors at the institute, Misty teaching battle tactics, and Brock teaching the history of Pokémon and human interaction. Professor Oak, Gary, Ash's mother. It was a celebration not of victory, but of a new beginning. On their fingers, they wore simple, unadorned bands. They didn't need gems or precious metals. Their bond was a thing of far greater brilliance. They were no longer just a trainer and a gym leader. They were leaders of a new era, architects of a more hopeful world, their love the foundation upon which it was all built. Ash looked out at the bright, bustling hall, at the future they were building together, and felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been long, the battles had been hard, but he was finally, truly home. He looked down at Sabrina. She was already looking at him, a quiet, knowing smile on her face, her violet eyes full of a love as vast and deep as the cosmos she had once been tempted by. No words were needed. Their minds, their hearts, their souls touched in a silent, perfect moment of shared understanding. A silent promise, made in a dark cave on a dying island, now and forever kept. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.